Chapter 1 Once and Forever. He gazed at the back of the head of the masked cloak-wearing man, not liking his choice of acting. They stood in the clearing as the air slowly was becoming heavier. And behind him, Kisame and his followers curiously observed the complicated technique of the unique summoning. "Isn't it a bit too much? 1 or 2 beasts would be more than enough," mumbled Sasuke, sporting the bored expression as the flames of chakra, earth and the dust started to rise. He stood with his arms crossed behind the man, waiting for him to finish. He heard the chuckle, and the man's body started to shake as he laughed. He then raised his arms artistically, slowly and meaningfully. "No, this is perfect. I want them to see and feel my wrath," he said seriously, and his palms grew into tight fists, and the ring on his finger shone in the sunlight as he started to laugh again. The noise that filled the air was terrifying. It was coming from afar, but it made you feel small in comparison to enormous power you felt with every fiber of your being. In the middle of the day, without a warning, a sign or illusion, it started. After feeling the unknown source of chakra, and something resembling the earthquake Kakashi appeared on the training grounds that were on the edge of the village hidden in leaves, it let him be the witness of a coming threat, and his eye impossibly widened. There, ahead, were trees that created high and thick forest, but above the tops you could easily see the monsters. The sun mocked Konoha shinobi with a beautiful and seemingly peaceful day, while in reality on the horizon their enemy appeared, to slaughter and destroy them. More and more gathered together, counting in shock and fear 5-tailed demons. It was the beginning of the end. All of them knew that they had no chance of defeating such power, and their main objective was to survive. In the matter of seconds, the peace turned into chaos, as Chunin were taking villagers, academy students and other young and weak ninja to shelters. Hokage himself, Umbu and Jounin stayed on the scene, taking in the sight that could be the last thing they see, preparing to do all in their might to face the Bijou. "We will need the help from higher summons. Tsunade Katsuyu should stay behind. The fight must be led by the boss summon of the toads and turtles." "Where is Tenzo?" said the bandaged aged man, the new appointed Hokage, Danzo. "Gamabunta couldn't hold off the fox alone for long, and you think that 3 summons will be enough to stop the 5 demons? There's no chance for us to fight it longer than a minute," shouted Tsunade. The blonde woman clearly saw they had no chance of surviving. Silently, many of the present shinobi agreed with her, doing their best to hide the trembling of their bodies, as demonic chakra invoked fear and hopelessness inside of them. The blue, red, and green forms of the beasts were getting closer, and the shaking earth under their feet caused them to look forward and lose their ideas, as their hearts were ready to stop before they were ripped out of them by force. It was easy to guess. Akatsuki finally decided to attack, and they decided to level their village with earth. They controlled these hellish creatures, and there was almost nothing and no one to stop them. "There's no time for the full evacuation. The only thing we can do is fight," said Danzo, grimly staring ahead. "I can use Mangekyo Sharingan to send to the other dimension 1.5 demons at most, but it will cost me all of my chakra," voiced the one-eyed Jounin, turning to the leader as his frame stilled with resolve. The tremors of the ground got stronger and caused some of shinobi to collapse. From behind, where the streets of the village started, could be heard the shouts and screams. The harsh gust of wind reached them, and 2 of the demons loudly roared. "How do you use Mangekyo Sharingan for that?" asked the orange-clad blonde standing next to him, as his gaze didn't leave the horizon. His teacher glanced at him but quickly got his eyes back on the enemy. "It doesn't matter right now, Naruto. We don't have time for this." The Jounin made a step forward and lifted his right hand, preparing for the motion of raising his headband. "It does matter, just tell me." The man gritted his teeth, uncovering his red eye. "I just focus on one thing and will it to disappear, to travel somewhere else as I direct my chakra to the eye. It doesn't matter, because I can use this only once anyway." "Me too," whispered the boy to himself as he unzipped his jacket and tore his black mesh shirt. Hatake was a man who couldn't be easily surprised. He was prepared for a battle before it started. He always calculated which way the enemy goes, and he was always ready for unexpected because he expected almost everything and anything. But among all things having a chance to happen, there was no reply resembling the one he just heard. He could turn and ask if what he heard was correct, but it was impossible, and even if it was possible, that course of action was not recommended in a situation he found himself in. He had no time to ponder over complications when he had to do his job first. He put the troubling thoughts in the back of his mind and focused. The blonde had only one thought in his mind. He had to protect the village. Just as Tsunade said, there's no chance they can win against the combined power of the demons. Even if he released the power of Kyuubi, it wouldn't be enough. He wouldn't manage to fight and protect the others at the same time, while one slip in controlling his demon could result in him becoming the enemy. So if one technique is enough to completely stop one or more demons, then he will do it. One powerful eye belonging to Kakashi can stop 1 or 1.5, so 2 eyes could stop 2 to 3 demons, sending them to another dimension. If he manages to stop, for then Konoha shall be saved, and possibly, the enemy will discard the idea of going further. He bit his right thumb and it crossed the black markings over his heart. Narrowing his eyes in concentration, he performed about 20 hand seals, muttering under his breath in the end. Arts of sealing, seal breaking. His head rose and 2 red blazing eyes gazed at the enemy. Seeing as slowly, one and partly another demon were pulled into the deforming space, courtesy of Kakashi. Mangekyo Sharingan, the blonde whispered, and both he and his teacher got on their knees, unable to keep standing on the shaking ground. The demons simultaneously roared in pain and confusion. It was painful, as if something was wrapping your mind and pulling your soul out of your body. It hurt. He kept trying, and it was hard to keep your focus on such a wide area. 3 of the demons were enormous, so to make sure they were not only in the field of his vision but also under the force of the technique was almost insane to try to achieve. But he was never the one to give up when something seemed impossible. He promised to never give up. The beasts trashed and screamed, as their forms were becoming smaller. Isn't it a blessing that Hatake possessed a Sharingan eye? But isn't it a curse that Konoha Jinchuriki gained it too? Thought the 6th Hokage, curiously observing the 2 shinobi. If they manage to stop the attack, the history will tell that Konoha faced 5 powerful demons and won, without being touched. But how has this boy obtained such power? Was it possible that he and his perverted sensei created a new level of sealing techniques? Level so high it let this boy possess the Sharingan? No, this can't be possible. If it was, someone would have already created and used it. The Jounin panted, and after taking one more glance at the horizon to confirm he indeed sent the demon away, fell on the ground exhausted. He was close to blacking out, and the last thing he saw was his student, whose blood was covering his cheeks in streaks as it flowed from his eyes. His breathing was uneven, and he was on the verge of losing consciousness while the drops of sweat appeared on his forehead, neck and chest. And just the moment later, when the ground became still, an area ahead of them became silent. The blonde finally blinked, and from the corner of his mouth slid down a drop of dark red blood, which followed the violent coughing. She was worried. She didn't know what exactly happened, but she had to take care of them. Her hands traveled over their bodies as the soft green light brought them strength and soothed their pain and exhaustion. Her hand stopped over the strange marks on Naruto's chest. Tsunade deeply frowned and tried to find its meaning. She's never seen anything like this, and the only specialist in seals she knew was her teammate. But Jiraiya left them, and the person she could trust about it was Naruto himself and no one else. He was unconscious, but the slight glow of the seal troubled her. In the village, the noise of worry and panic ceased. It got awfully quiet, and even seemed that the danger was still in the air, waiting for a right moment to appear. "Tie his hands and legs," ordered Danzo, looking at the boy without trust. "What? Why?" voiced the medic, scowling and sharply turning to look at the man. He raised his head and his fingers tightly gripped the cane. "We don't know how he came to possess that bloodline, but we know that there were only 3 Uchiha to reach the level of Mangekyo Sharingan: Madara, Itachi, and Sasuke. And the only logical explanation is Itachi, who only recently died. Why would the serial murderer and a high-class criminal let this boy, and may I remind the target of the criminal organization this murderer belonged to, get his Kekai Genkai? It is illogical. As of now, we can't trust Uzumaki Naruto." The woman dropped her eyes and hastily finished the healing. How couldn't she know of this? She was constantly in contact with Jiraiya, but he hasn't ever mentioned anything of this caliber happening. Was it a secret? Why would Jiraiya keep secrets from her? He kept saying that she knows more than anyone, and that he will always share everything with her, as silly as it sounded. But this? Near the border of Konoha. The fabric of the black-red clouded cloak danced in the wind, but the masked man wearing it stood still, as his fists trembled in anger. Mangekyo Sharingan. I knew that Hatake reached that level, but to be able to use it on that scale, that's a mystery. His voice was calm, skeptic, but there was just a tiny bit of admiration he tried to hide with his demeanor. Behind him, utterly shocked, his companions and minions stared at the point where the summons disappeared. He knew that despite being sent to another dimension, their souls were sealed in demonic statue. So to summon them again, he has to wait for their chakra to restore. Getting close to the village now wasn't interesting. They were ready, gathered, evacuated. The surprising and main part of his plan failed. So acting now would be plain stupid. He couldn't have done this, said the young Uchiha and turned away. He didn't believe in Kakashi having that ability in the least. The red-haired girl of the group, Karen, looked at him with the wide eyes. She opened her mouth but closed it, and seeing others giving her glances, crossed her arms and adjusted her glasses. We will regroup and Zetsu will investigate this. Bijou need time to gather their chakra, the leader said. Sasuke placed his hands in pockets and tilted his head. I have to take care of something first. Heads rolling? Sang Madara, turning to him. I assume you take your little group with you? Do whatever you want, Sasuke-kun, but don't get caught or seen and come back to the base. The man waved his hand uncaringly and disappeared from view. Seeing him and the shark man go, the girl made sure they were far enough. She turned her eyes to Sasuke again and spoke. I don't know if Madara felt it or not, but beside Hatake using Sharingan, there was also the chakra of someone else. You may not believe it, but that chakra was similar to Itachi in some ways. He couldn't hide his surprise hearing that. Because that was impossible. Because Itachi left him. Because he killed him. Because Itachi gave him his 3 most powerful techniques, leaving in this world only these 3 things. Dying. There is nothing more left of his brother? Or is there? Konoha Hospital. Without knocking, the pink-haired girl, a medic, banged into the room, scanning it with her green shining eyes and stopping her gaze on the bed by the window. She ran to it, not looking at the other occupants in the room, Tsunade, Tenzo, Danzo, and Inoichi. Her blonde teammate looked vulnerable. His wrists and ankles were strapped to the bed, while his bare chest revealed a seal above his heart. Round-shaped, it was formed from the small, carefully drawn seals. She decided she could care less about what her friend does to his body, but more important was his health. She stooped and checked his state. He was sleeping, resting. Overexertion, just a bit more and he could end up in a coma. What the hell did he do? This morning she saw him in the high spirits and in perfect shape. He should be fine, Sakura, said the woman, watching the street below from the window. Tsunade-sama, Danzo-sama, she turned to her master. When the attack and evacuation started, I was here in a hospital. What happened? Tsunade kept quiet. She didn't know how to form the words so that it didn't put Naruto in trouble. It was surreal. With what they saw, they could easily accuse Naruto of being a traitor, or it could mean that Itachi controlled him through the unknown technique. Could mean anything, but all Mangekyo wielders were and are enemies to Konoha. So in any way, it couldn't end well for the boy. We don't know yet, but we intend to find out. Inoichi, if you don't mind, answered Danzo, patiently waiting for secrets to unfold. The man standing by the wall nodded and moved to stand by the head of the bed, which let him see the face of the blonde turned upside down. His expression was peaceful and calm, giving him the serene look. He inwardly wondered if there was ever any evil inside of this child beside the fox. He wouldn't believe there was any treachery unless he saw this with his eyes. Taking a deep breath in, he made 11 hand seals and placed his fingers to the temples of the blonde head. He focused on connecting their minds and let his mind sink into unknown, traveling to the present and the past, in search of answers. Flashback over a year ago. They traveled through the rock country, bickering as usually about their routine. The white-haired man had a grimace on his face as his upper lip deformed and his brows raised in undefined expression. I told you no ninjutsu before you learn taijutsu. You're not talented in that field anyway. His blonde companion, the young student he took under his wing, lifted his arms to heavens, staring there and loudly asking why his teachers were stupid problematic perverts that didn't teach him anything useful. He made unsatisfied sounds from his mouth and kept mumbling, scratching the back of his neck. His new black and orange outfit didn't make him seem older or more mature. His mutterings after 2 minutes were the cause of his teacher's annoyed grimace. That and he didn't want to travel to Rock, but had to. They entered the thicket some 20 minutes ago and it didn't look like they will move out in less than 2 hours. Better travel unseen in the almost hostile country. He frowned, feeling the familiar chakra. Not taking risks, he stopped and grabbed his student's shoulder. The blonde turned to look at him, but he paid attention to surroundings, searching for the source of chakra he noticed. Finding it, he hesitated for a moment, but against his better judgment, he started to walk to it with his student following behind. What they came upon was unexpected scene. Crawling on the ground, alone and injured, was Uchiha Itachi. After the shock of seeing it, the hermit gathered himself. Well, well. He grinned and stroked his chin. If it isn't Uchiha Itachi. What got you, kid? He asked, making a smart face. The trader of the Leaf Village scowled and attempted to rise from the ground. He failed, and the blood dropped on the earth from the wound as he twisted, gritting his teeth, and gripped his side. The blonde had widened eyes and stared at the sight. The older ninja got serious and considered the options. They could go their own way, leaving him here. They could kill him. That was probably the most logical action. He is the enemy and he is after Naruto. They could stop him now while he's weak and unarmed. That was easier than fighting him in a real battle. One Akatsuki member less. They're lucky to stumble over occasion. We have to get rid of you, Itachi. Sooner or later you'd be too much of a trouble. Voiced the man, getting closer. His student gulped and stared at him from behind. Wha? You want to kill him? Jiraiya turned and quizzically looked at the blonde. Yeah. He made another step to the lost and angry criminal. Don't want to look, then turn away, added Jiraiya. He didn't know why, but the look of Itachi hurt him. The man was so powerful, unbeaten, and smart that the picture of him showing weakness was unbearable. There was just something lacking in that picture, something that should be familiar. Maybe it was history. It always says about heroes and the strongest, and describes as they die by enemy's hand. Like Yondaime, who died fighting Kyuubi, like Sandaime, who died fighting Orochimaru. He wanted to be the strong shinobi too, but he didn't want to die by the hands of bystanders, when he crawls on the enemy territory injured. It wasn't right to die just because instead of helping you, somebody wants you dead. Maybe there also was this little voice inside that said that Itachi was supposed to be killed by his sibling. He shouldn't die like this, like a dog. You're doing it all wrong, Ero Sennin, he loudly and stubbornly complained. The man grimaced, irritated, and still holding a kunai in his right hand, turned to face his student, and the ends of his long hair swiftly whipped. Now what? Naruto scratched his head. We shouldn't kill him. Let's help. The older man stared at him, dumbfounded. Say what? Are you serious? He and his little organization of psychopaths are hunting you down and want you dead. We have to make sure there are less of them. So what? He's injured. Unarmed. Right now he's not a shinobi but a fucking dying man. Language. Shut up and help him. Hell no. Come on. Want him saved? Do it yourself, Naruto. I'm not going to have anything to do with this shit. You asshole. The man on the ground watched the exchange stupefied and unblinkingly, but his wounds reminded about themselves and he coughed blood, stopping the two from shouting. It caused them to look at him, and after muttering a few curses the blonde strode to him and turned him on his back, at which he hissed from pain. Seeing the damage, the blonde gulped, but he gathered himself, seeing Itachi's pained look. He didn't make much of the sound, but he couldn't keep his face stoic, and that said something. He took the bandages and water from his pouch and cleaned the wound. Then he wrapped the bandage over it and a piece of the reaped out from the cloak cloth to add it some strength. Not wasting time, he pulled the dying shinobi over his shoulder and started to walk. Jiraiya observed his student with a shaking of his head. They traveled in that fashion for about 4 hours, before they found a hotel to stop at. At that point the Nuke Nin was unconscious and Naruto placed him in his room, where he changed the bandages and sewed the wounds. 2 days later, he woke up feeling the discomfort. Opening his eyes, he saw the blonde Jinchuriki sprinkling his wound with something green and at the look disgusting. Wait, what Naruto is doing here? Where? The last thing he remembered, he and Kisame were fighting the four-tailed beast Jinchuriki and were defeated. He was injured and he lost the sight of his partner. He was found by Jiraiya, and Naruto decided to help him. Woke up. Itachi stared at the blonde, who not receiving the reply got back to redoing the wrappings. He was extremely careful and it looked like he was doing it for a second or a third time. No surprise here. They were in a simple hotel room, presumably not too far from the incident. 2 beds, a table, few shelves and the bathroom. A wide window with the white curtains. I suck at medic jutsu so I heal you the old way. It takes longer but sensei refused to even look at your wound. Don't worry, I know something about herbs, so you're not gonna die. His speech followed quite the long silence and he covered his patient with sheets after finishing the procedure. Why are you doing this? The man asked, not showing any emotions. His question stopped the boy in his tracks and his eyes danced around the room, not finding the right answer. Itachi patiently waited, observing his actions. Finally, the blue pools resembling the sky stared at him and he couldn't look away. I'm not sure. I just think it was unfair, he said inside. You have to eat something. I'll get you soup, he muttered, and with that, strode to the door. The raven-haired man glanced at the window, but hearing the steps halt, he turned to look at the blonde, who stopped by the door but turned around and slowly strode to the window. On his way to it, he pointedly looked at Itachi and then he closed it. After that, he reached his bed and rummaged in his backpack. After a moment, he took out a piece of paper and smirking got close to the man. I know what you're thinking. Don't be stupid. I'll be back. With that, he put the paper on the man's forehead and Itachi instantly fell asleep. When he woke up again, it was with a headache and a smell of food. He grimaced at that, feeling a slight nausea. Not ramen, but I doubt you would mind, he heard the blonde say and sleepily opened his eyelids. Naruto sat on the bed he was placed on his left to be precise, and was checking, or something, the bowl of soup with chopsticks. I know you'll get hurt with your wound if you rise, so I am kind and gonna feed you. Open your mouth. Now that was low. The blonde caught something with chopsticks and raised it, directing the food to the man's mouth, which was shut. What? There's no poison. If I wanted you dead, you wouldn't be here. Itachi didn't listen. He was offended. Who did he think he was? A 5-year-old? That is insulting, Naruto-kun. Do you want to do this just to boast later you fed an aka dash? He couldn't finish the sentence because the chopsticks appeared in his mouth and he was forced to chew and swallow. The black eyes of his patient were glaring with passion, and he was reminded of times when Sasuke presented him with that famous look. It happened quite often because Naruto often gave his teammate a reason to do so. This bit of nostalgia made him smile and he happily picked a vegetable in a bowl with the sticks. Itachi glared. The food was presented to him once again and he made a vow not to open his mouth. The blonde raised a brow and then his smile became creepy. Oh, don't play a Mr. Bad with me. You think you're stubborn? I can tell you a joke. His statement did not impress a criminal. You will laugh, the blonde added. A moment later, the words registered in the man's mind and his expression turned into fear. There should absolutely be no witness of Uchiha Itachi laughing. A smirk, a scowl, a glare is fine, but laugh. Was he provoking him? Mocking him? This kid is a little demon. The blonde smirked and there was a glint in his eyes. Okay, so, there was once this day Tsunade was in the hot springs in Jira. Before he finished, Itachi's eyes impossibly widened and he hurriedly opened his mouth. The blonde put the food inside and grinned. Good boy. Itachi's glare intensified. Another piece of food traveled in his mouth and he angrily swallowed. He willingly opened his mouth now but showed he didn't like it. He was almost stripped of pride. Don't want me to continue? Too bad. That was a good story. In silence, Itachi ate the soup and the blonde put the bowl away when he finished. Naruto stood up and picked up his headband and jacket from his bed. "Are you doing this only for Sasuke to kill me later?" the man asked. "No," replied his savior, putting on the jacket and sighing. He placed the piece of paper on the man's forehead. That day he trained, and as usually he and Jiraiya fought about learning jutsus, adding to their quarrel a topic of him saving a serial murderer. His teacher was completely against the idea and repeated that they should kill him or at least leave him there in a hotel and disappear from this country before other members of that organization came to visit them. He couldn't understand why Naruto would save the enemy knowing that it will do no good. And he couldn't stand the thought of that killer sleeping in the same room with his student. That was too dangerous. That was why he was behind the door or the window most of the time. The boy's heart was too big. It will make him very happy one day, or make him suffer for the rest of his days. Jiraiya tried to convince himself that there was at least one positive thing about the killer. He had a pride, and that meant that he wouldn't hurt Naruto while the boy took care of him. And he will remember that he owes a debt, and he will pay back in the future. The older man knew that there were things he can't understand. He also knew that Naruto had a gift of convincing, saving, and changing people. He only prayed that gift worked now. He heard the rumors of the blonde Jinchuriki claiming to bring Uchiha Sasuke back to the village one day. He wanted to save his teammate, his friend, and more than often, people said that he will never be able to do this. Because he's weak, naive, stupid, and irresponsible. Because people didn't want to believe him, because people didn't believe in him. He could call it a pressure. Everyone expected you to fail. They don't have faith in you and they are convinced your acts have no good intentions behind it. It must be hard. Living to prove they're wrong and you're right. Living to go through the obstacles with only stubbornness and faith to aid you. Maybe he himself partly knows how it is. Itachi got over his stubbornness and decided that he had time to get to know the blonde better. He was curious. The next day, they walked through the town in disguise. It wouldn't do to travel with a missing Nin through the main street in daylight. So Jiraiya got shorter and older. He wore a wide brown cloak with a hood, looking like a poor and lost old man. The blonde turned into brunette and his eyes became green. He supported the young man who leaned on him, walking with difficulty. That was a pretty man with the short black hair. He didn't look like Shinobi, rather like another poor traveler. The black and red cloak was buried behind the hotel, so who was hard to tell. They had to get further from the place where they found Itachi to make sure they don't meet other Akatsuki members on their way. Jiraiya refused to look at his student. That morning they fought over Itachi, again. He wanted to ask him questions, maybe find out something about the group, especially their abilities. Of course Uchiha wouldn't ever speak, so he planned to interrogate the kid using some Toad Clan's special techniques. But the blonde would have none of it. It even appears he cares for his patient too much. He ended their conversation stating that if Itachi wanted, he'd tell them about the group himself, and in that way protected him from Jiraiya's methods. He was annoyed with his behavior, but in one thing Naruto was right. He did say he didn't want to have anything to do with it, so starting now was his mistake. But he'll be damned if he says that aloud. He inwardly snickered, remembering how they left the rooms. He refused to help again. Naruto was left to resort to his own knowledge of illusions, changing Itachi's look. The man was still too weak to use his chakra. The funniest was Itachi's face when the blonde suggested turning him into female, promising that no one would ever guess that it was a male. Sure, Naruto could do this, but Itachi subtly gave him some tips on what to do and that idea was discarded. Too bad. He wondered how that deadly shinobi would look in a female skin. They entered their shared room and the blonde led Itachi to the bathroom. "You'll shower and then we'll change the bandages. You need any help?" The raven-haired man sighed. "No," and turning away closed the door. Deep inside he tried to remember when was the last time anyone cared for him the way the blonde did. He was still very young when he joined the high-class missions and hunted, captured and killed people. He quickly became an adult and no one looked at him like at the child anymore. Even for his family he became a perfect shinobi, a machine, an example. He wasn't human anymore, and he did what everyone expected of him. Perfection. He believed in it so hard that when he discovered the secrets of politics and his clan, his whole perfect world shattered. He came out of it lost and lonely, and there was practically no one he could hold on to. Nothing mattered for him. Everything was false. He left with a tiny thread of his brother's hatred connecting him to his village. and he kept looking behind, despite him moving forward. He considered himself a grown-up man that didn't need stupid things like money, power, and women. But that little feeling of warmth that spread through him every time the blonde treated him like a child was unique. It was like being cared for by a mother or a close friend who knows you better than you do, who knows that you lie when you say you're fine, who knows that you're awake when you pretend to sleep, and who forgives you despite knowing of the things you did. It almost made him happy. He got used to people being scared of him and treating him with fear and respect. So when someone you're supposed to kill and who knows of it casually asks if you need any help when in a bathroom, you raise a brow or you laugh. Itachi smiled. The next day, evening. The blonde Jinchuriki cleaned the wound and discreetly watched and counted the scars on the man's ribs, chest, and stomach. He didn't know what he felt. He wasn't surprised to see that, definitely. He wasn't disgusted or anything. He just thought that there was a lot this man had to go through. Many of them must have been painful. They were the traces, the memories of his battles, and to think that someone so young got over that many was fascinating. He was a witness of these new scars forming on his body. I heard that Orochimaru plans to get control over Sasuke's body soon. Surprisingly, Itachi started a conversation. It seemed he wouldn't ever speak if he didn't have to, but he just changed that. The blonde glanced at the man and started to cover the wound with a cream. He'll never be able to do that. Sasuke won't let him, he said doubtlessly. Isn't it a part of the deal? Training in exchange for his body? You say Sasuke doesn't keep his word. That I said. The blonde narrowed his eyes, focusing on the skin of the man. The bastard never keeps his promises. Itachi raised a brow. That was just sweet. In one sentence, Naruto described the nature of the every Uchiha. Here he remembered his own words. Maybe next time, Sasuke. Not now, maybe later, Sasuke. I don't have time today, but I promise tomorrow. No one has ever managed that before. He said he'd rebuild a clan, sever the ties, give his body to that snake and other stuff. But you know what? I think that deep inside he's a softie. He'll run away and hide somewhere. He may find you and fight you, but he wouldn't kill ya, the blonde continued, shaking his head. And then he will come back and behave as if nothing happened. As if nothing happened, the man repeated. Naruto looked at him for a minute and shrugged. Want my opinion? You're a softie too, the blonde said. The dead silence was calm after that, and Itachi only raised his brows. He couldn't smirk or scowl because that would mean that Naruto was right. He was just something else. Who says to a killer that he's a softie? Someone as stupid and brave as this boy. And you know what? He'll get away with it. Just like he gets away with calling Tsunade Bachan, Jiraiya Erosenin, Kakashi Cyclops, and the council old geezers. Don't make that face. I know you won't deny that. Just so you know, the scary man is Erosenin. When he's serious and that idiotic attitude lands in the bin, you don't want to get on his bad side. The blonde muttered, wrapping Itachi in bandages. The man gazed at him, forming calculations. And what if once Sasuke finds me, I kill him? Will you still think of me that way? The man inquired seriously. The question caused Naruto to stop what he was doing. Really, what if he saves this man now and he kills Sasuke later? That would mean that he was responsible for the death of his friend. But would Itachi really kill his brother? Could he? I don't know. He got back to the work. Though now his moves were reserved. Why would you? Why wouldn't I? He said, hiding every emotion, causing him to look icily cold and intimidating. That tone sent shivers down Naruto's spine. Was this an act, or did he just see the real Itachi? He thought back on the day he saw him crawling on the earth, bleeding and coughing, when he had no strength to keep the facade. He was dying then, and his eyes didn't lie. He wasn't a heartless killer. He was a human being, a man. He wasn't scared of death. He wanted to live to do something. There are people that live for themselves and they are heartless, egoistic assholes that do everything to stay alive. And there are people that live for others and they are caring and kind and they die, protecting someone they care for. Itachi rather belonged to the second part, though there could always be the third. The blonde gathered the medicine and other items and stood up. You could have killed him years ago, but you didn't. There must have been a reason he's still alive for. And something tells me that reason is still there. he turned and left, leaving Itachi to ponder over the things that were said. That night Naruto didn't put the sleeping seal on him, because when he got back to the room, the man was asleep. He shrugged it off and got to rest himself, never noticing Itachi open his eyes minutes later. A bit of soft moonlight entered the room and the ends of the blue curtains of the wide-opened window shifted slightly, as if touched by the hand of the wind. The silence filled the air, and the occupants of the nearby rooms slept too, because there was no sound from behind the walls or the outside. The man sat on the edge of the bed, gazing down at the face of his savior. The white light only partly lit the man's face and hands, that he kept on his lap, making him look clean. The only sound in the room was Naruto's breathing, and the man observed as his chest rose and fell. He was completely still and he didn't want to wake him. He wanted to watch. Maybe he wanted to touch, just to make sure it wasn't a dream. His eyes were sad and even aged, as his slim and long fingers shifted only slightly, without a sound, over his own knees, making the moonlight cover them with the soft silver glow. This teen saved more than his life, healed more than his body, and saw more than his face. He saved his dreams and goals because he let him live. He healed his soul because he reminded him that he is still human, and that he's not alone and that his dreams are reality. And above all that, he took a look inside of him, and his gaze reached his heart, where his feelings were hidden in the darkness, so deep that he himself didn't dare to look. He knew that it's not easy to see inside someone's soul, and it's not pretty if that soul is lost and ugly, because it's fed with hatred, bitterness, and pain. What did Naruto see inside his heart? Did he see that he still cares for his younger brother? Did he see his loneliness? He lifted his hands, pressed his palms together, and leaning on his knees with elbows, put the palms to his face, his chin, lips, and nose. He observed as Naruto turned in bed, on his back, and unconsciously faced the man sitting nearby. He observed his skin, tanned and smooth, his light blonde hairs, that even in the gloom, added this place warmth. He observed as the eyes behind the eyelids shifted, looking left and right, causing the lashes to flicker. The whisker marks at night were darker, crossing the boy's cheeks confidently, and adding some mystery to his look. Itachi's eyes looked on the floor. Naruto was lonely too. 2 days later, the blonde sat on his bed, reading over some scrolls and frowning over the lines. He wore a white t-shirt and blue shorts. Surprisingly, his looks lacked orange color that morning. His headband was on the pillow, and his shiny yellow locks fell down on his face. His right knee was raised, and his right hand leaned on it, making him look completely relaxed. Few other scrolls, bigger and smaller, were on his bed and by it on the floor. Is that true that Sharingan lets the wielder not only mimic but learn the moves? He casually asked, not looking up. What was he reading? Why do you ask? Itachi was leaning with his back on the headboard of the bed, holding in his hands his slashed Konoha headband and caressing it tenderly. He lazily watched Naruto. Just curious. He picked up another scroll and opened it, searching for something. The pervert said that Orochimaru wants Sharingan because his dream was to learn every jutsu that exists in this world. So, that made me think, how can you remember that much? I heard that Kakashi-sensei knew over 1,000, but I saw him use only few. Then what's the deal? Itachi tilted his head. Sharingan lets the user analyze and memorize what he sees. The user may not use all of this, but he will always remember. You can call it photographic memory. The eye helps understand what you see and keep it in your memories. Anytime the user can search through his memories for a suitable technique, be it nin, tai, or genjutsu, then the deal is to be able to use it, be it the suitable amount of chakra or a physical state. The blonde was still for a minute, then nodded. Yeah, like you can remember the technique, but if that was a bloodline, you'll never be able to use it. Interesting. The soft silence fell on them as the blonde continued to read and frown. Jiraiya left with the sunrise, claiming to have an important meeting. He promised to be back afternoon. They stayed in the same hotel, but they will leave it tomorrow. Changing the place was a routine. Naruto got used to it, but he still complained that was just in his nature. What do you read? Itachi was bored. The least the blonde could do was talk to him. He was used to Kisame bubbling for hours as they traveled. so this little bit of silence was unsettling. Jiraiya probably taught Naruto that silence was important for shinobi to survive. But it doesn't mean that he has to deal with it in boredom. Some stuff on chakra control, I suck with it, so Ero-Sennin doesn't want to teach me ninjutsu. Haven't you learned the tree and water walking? Itachi raised a brow. I did, but the fox's chakra gets in the way of my training. I can't get rid of it? The blonde scowled and then grimaced, throwing the scroll in his hands away. He sighed and lay on his back. Maybe you should learn to work with it and control it. You can't get rid of it. Easier said than done. Maybe sealing it completely away is a better idea, he mumbled. You must learn to control it. It is a part of you. One day you will need it, Itachi said softly. Uchiha giving advice. That was new. Later that day, the blonde stood in the entrance to the bathroom, watching as Itachi carefully shaved. He had a small scroll on him since the beginning. It contained small trivial things like soap with berry fragrance, scissors, black nail polish, a small silver blade he used for shaving, and even threads and needles. Itachi glanced at him from time to time, not saying anything. He saw him in reflection of the mirror as the blonde leaned on the door frame. His right hand was raised and pressed to the wall, supporting him. He was quiet and didn't ask questions, and he seemed to be sad. Itachi rinsed his face and stoically faced his own reflection. We're leaving with the sunrise, me and Jiraiya. Itachi kept quiet. His gaze traveled from his own wet face to Naruto. What could he say to that? Be careful on the road? See you around? He was Itachi, for God's sake. Uchiha Itachi rarely speaks. Uchiha doesn't show emotion and doesn't care. And no, I won't tell you where we'll go, the blonde said with a smile, attempting to make a joke. Itachi didn't react to that, so Naruto's smile fell. He was serious again, and with a last look at the man, he turned and entered the room. For a few long minutes, the man stared at the place where the blonde stood. He looked at it through the mirror, wondering if he felt anything. And he did. He knew that he befriended the boy. He knew that he could spend that way weeks and months, and he wouldn't get tired or bored. It almost hurt that they are parting. Naruto will train with his sensei, meet other people that will be his friends too. And Itachi will be nothing more than his friend's brother he saved on the way one day. He will be one of many. A man that doesn't matter because he's not so special to Naruto. He's just a memory. But why should he be anything more? At least the teen will remember him, even though he's the enemy. Isn't it beautiful? To be looked upon like a human being, not a heartless killer? The man looked down, and after blinking 2 times he reached for a towel and dried his already dry face. With the sun rising on the horizon, they parted. They did not exchange words. No goodbye, or a simple thank you. Silently, Jiraiya started to walk away, leaving his student and the raven behind, and for a minute, Itachi stared at the blonde, not willing to show what he felt. It made him look sad, and if you looked closely, apologetic. Seeing that, Naruto wanted to somehow fill the tense silence, but couldn't find his voice. Itachi sadly smiled. He looked down on the ground and, turning around, left. A few months later, they entered a small town searching for a medic. Kisame constantly scowled. He knew not to say a thing, but he had to express his distress somehow. His partner harshly coughed, and his palm, which was pressed to his lips, was covered in blood. He used Mangekyo Sharingan to its full extent again, and his health worsened. It had something to do with the bloodline, he knew. Itachi said that there's nothing to cure him, but he needed some serious painkillers. With every usage of his special abilities, his lifespan shortened, and he was troubled with the speed his state got worse with. If that continues, he will not have enough time left to... He blinked, realizing that his plans had a less chance of coming true. They found a medic in a questionable place, some bar by the red light district, but they couldn't risk appearing somewhere where people would immediately recognize them and sell that information further. The price for those pills was high, but that didn't matter. He swallowed one and waited for its effects. They were almost instant. He relaxed and noticed the pain receding. Then he felt a bit of pleasure. It wasn't physical, because physically he didn't feel anything. It was psychological pleasure. He suddenly stopped caring if he died or not. He stopped worrying over burdens on his shoulders. He stopped thinking for quite long. His mind rested, finally, and he let it wander wherever it wanted. So instead of analyzing things as it usually did, it presented him with his own memories. Fortunately, they didn't bring sadness and misery with them, even though he knew some of them were just painful. He was drunk with the feeling of freedom and simplicity. There was nothing he cared for and nothing he wanted. He existed without bonds, strings, fears and pain for those few hours under the drug influence. That was wonderful. That was easy. That was good. The last moments of the drug effect filled his mind with the memory of the teen that saved him. He didn't share with anyone about it. As far as anybody knew, he was injured in a battle and found a shelter in the nearby town where he took care of his wounds in a hospital, using illusions to make sure no one ever saw their Uchiha Itachi. Then he traveled at the slow pace back to the base, stopping here and there to gather some information. Everyone was satisfied with it. He decided at some point that he will not ponder over what happened, but that memory haunted him at unexpected times. Such as this. He had no feelings about it now, but the teen was kind to him, and he was kind to his brother. He never ever said a bad word about him, and that wasn't because of some pity. They were friends. He didn't judge him even though Sasuke became a traitor. Naruto wanted to save him. He wanted to bring him back and help him. Itachi wanted to help him too, but his time was getting short. He lost this precious thing bit by bit, day by day, and as Sasuke was getting stronger, he was getting weaker. His sight was poor. He inwardly smiled, knowing that Naruto's choice of word would be shitty. What a pity. Can he find out what Pain and Madara are up to and stop them? Keep tabs on Root and Danzo and let Sasuke find him and fight him? Can he pull this off? He may have not enough time for that, but there's no one to do this for him. Akatsuki and Danzo maybe are not as important as his brother, but the only person he knows that will care for Sasuke after things said and done is Naruto. But Naruto is still not strong enough and he has his own problems. And Madara will not let him slip. It is even possible that after he dies, Madara will seek his brother to fill in the whole of organization and convince him to join. That was so complicated, he has to form a plan. He has to ensure Sasuke's safety. 3 weeks have passed before he found Jiraiya and Naruto and found a chance to visit. They traveled through the Thunder Country and under the excuse of meeting with his informant Itachi parted with Kisame for a few days. That was a risky move, but he could always make a believable story to explain himself or simply erase unwanted memories if he was spotted by the wrong eyes. It was the late evening, and the main street was filled with people. The small town had a festival opened, and it was their 7th year of independence. The cloudy sky didn't take away a mood of celebration, and people laughed, smiled, and spent their free time together. If there were any shinobi, they were under disguise, and it was easy to hide in the crowds. He didn't risk, though, and his looks didn't differ from the young people around. Young lady with long brown hair with the white flowers in it, brown eyes of average height would gather attention, but the right one among men. Black dress reaching knees with the long sleeves was woman's choice of clothing for the evening, making men glance at her with interest. So Naruto was right. Change of gender was the easiest way, and truthfully, it didn't hurt his pride. After all, shinobi must be deceiving. He spotted the white head from afar, seeing as it turned left and right, looking for a bar with lots of beautiful ladies. Finally, the older man turned left by a fountain and entered a bar that was in the building covered with flowers, and which insides couldn't be seen from the outside. Waiting for about 5 minutes, the brunette casually strode there and entered. The place was simple, dark wooden, and had a wide assortment of alcohol. The windows were large but closed, and it was relatively quiet. Not looking for long, the girl walked to the occupied table. "Well, join me," Jiraiya spoke without looking up from menus. The brunette complied and sat in front of him. The waitress received an order and a moment later brought the bottle of sake. Having the filled cup in his hand, Jiraiya finally looked up and stared at the guest. "So, what are you here for, Itachi?" The man dispelled the illusion and faced the hermit in all his cloaked, black and red glory. The small smile the female sported disappeared and was replaced with an emotionless expression Uchiha Itachi was known for. "There is something I wish to talk to you about, Jiraiya-san," he replied softly. The older man shrugged and drank sake till the last drop in the cup. He slowly filled it once again and gazed at the visitor. "What is it?" he asked, almost not interested. His reaction did not offend Itachi, who reached inside the cloak and took out the piece of paper. He looked at it for some time, and then unfolded it and placed it on the table, under Jiraiya's eyes, who pressed the cup to his lips. Uncaringly, the hermit glanced down on it, and within a second his eyes widened and he spit the drink in surprise, choking. Through the ordeal, Itachi calmly sat in his chair and observed him. The man gathered himself and looked up at the missing Nin, stupefied. "What is the meaning of this?" he asked, pointing with his gaze at the paper, where the picture of a seal was drawn. Itachi calmly continued to stare at the hermit. "I believe you already know what I want to do with this." Jiraiya stared. Then he drank the sake and, putting the cup back on the table, picked up the piece of paper. He checked it, frowning and scowling down at it. "Where the hell did you find it?" he asked, somewhat angered. "I found it years ago in the family archive. I did not pay it attention then, but I remembered it," was the monotone reply. "So you know what it was used for?" The seal was placed on two people that wished for their souls to be inseparable. When one dies, its soul transfers to the still living part, so that one day they could reach the heavens together, said the man, looking for reaction on Itachi's face. It was usually used on the married couple and placed on the wedding day. It guaranteed that even after the death of one, they would still be together. Rarely, it was placed on the family members, parents and their children or siblings, he added, grimacing. The raven-haired man sat quietly, showing that he knew what it was used for. The last time it was used was 30 years ago. Since then, people forgot about the thing. Don't get me wrong. I see modifications you made, and I see what you planned, but why would you do that? Continued the man, completely lost. I have my reasons, replied Itachi after the long and heavy silence. Jiraiya filled his cup and, sighing, drank it. He knew that no torture would force Uchiha to speak, so he just let the matter drop for now and inspected the picture once more. Soul sealing was a rare and complicated process. It required precision and knowledge of this art, as well as reasoning behind it. Basically, the seal was identical to its original version, but physical aspects of its effects, added by Itachi himself, were never used before. It was dangerous, it was risky, but if it was done the right way, the power it could give the brat would be immense. But nothing in this world is easy. What is the price for that, Itachi? What do you want, coming to me with that offer? Uchiha smirked. I want you to examine the seal, and if there are any, correct the mistakes. His answer followed the silent minute. And? The hermit asked, waiting for more. That is all. The white-haired man considered asking, are you sure? But decided against it. His student once again hit the jackpot, and he will keep his mouth shut. The least he could do was make sure things went smooth. He leaned on the table with elbows and let his left hand cover his mouth partly, in concentration. He stared at the piece of paper in that manner for 10 full minutes, before a pencil appeared between the fingers of his right hand, and he started to correct the mistakes. He inwardly smiled at the irony, placing the small piece of paper with the sleeping seal on the forehead of the blonde, who slept on his back, entangled in sheets. He remembered when the boy placed it on him to make sure he slept and didn't run away. Now was his turn. It was late, and both he and Jiraiya silently observed the sleeping boy in the dark room. From the outside, they could still hear the joy of ongoing festival, as people still celebrated. The sky was almost black, and it was the sign of a soon starting salute. Itachi gracefully sat on the side of the bed and looked closely at the face of the boy. A while ago, he asked what he would do if Sasuke attacked Konoha. Will he protect the village, or will he protect his friend? He just said he would do both. Surprised the man. If he was still the shinobi of Konoha, he'd say he would choose his duty. After all, he was trained as the perfect shinobi, and the perfect shinobi has no heart and no feelings, which means he has no friends, no family, nor attachments. But Uzumaki Naruto is different. If you want to know the boy better, look at his favorite technique. The clone technique lets the user do more than one thing at the same time. It means that Naruto will look at things in a different way. He won't ask himself who he must choose to save or who he saves first. He will think of who must be saved by the real him or his clone. Itachi stared at the blonde a bit longer, and then thinking that his decision's been made, he calmly pulled the sheets down, revealing the shirtless chest of the teen. Jiraiya raised a brow when the man's pale fingers, with nails short and polished black, touched the skin of the boy, just above his heart, where the seal was meant to be placed. The fingers traced the lines that were yet to be drawn, as if caressing the place where the man's soul will land after death. The touch was gentle, while the man's eyes were hiding care, the smallest of fears and curiosity. "If you're not sure, this is the last moment to back out," voiced the older shinobi. Jiraiya stood leaning on the wall in the gloom. His arms were crossed as he observed Itachi. He knew that the raven-haired man will not change his mind, but he felt obliged to ask. "You will never be able to control Naruto. Your soul will have no consciousness, as it will become a part of him, with your memories, feelings, secrets, and abilities." The man just smiled, and the lights and the sounds of the salute reached them through the window, lightening the darkness they were in, letting both of them see the room clearer. The Toad Summoner sighed and closed his eyes, and pushing himself off the wall, he made a step further. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. The Hands I Kissed. The sunlight insisted on warming his eyelids, and instead of darkness, his closed eyes saw red. It was annoying, and after the third attempt of trying to fall back asleep, Naruto grimaced and sat up. He widely yawned, not bothering to cover his mouth, and scratched his neck and chest with his left hand. Then he blinked and looked around. He sighed a moment later, remembering that he didn't share the room with his perverted teacher this time. Yesterday the stupid man kept bubbling about finding some women and inviting them to the room, where little irritating brats should not be. So he was in the room next to his and probably drunk, naked, and stinking. They rarely rested under the sky, because Jiraiya preferred the comfort and perfect conditions for writing his books. That meant that he needed a hotel with the hot springs. For ladies. The blonde shook his head and strode to the bathroom, where he sleepily performed his routine rituals, wondering how to wake up his teacher this time. He could get the bucket of water like the last time and splash it over his teacher, claiming that he stinks too much. He could replace it with the paint or get a cat or a dog inside a room to annoy him, or he could summon the tens of small toads and perform some crazy prank involving singing, oil, and fire. The blonde loudly snickered, imagining what the picture would look like. He'll get a lot of fun doing that, all right? And he promised Gamakichi to invite him for that occasion. The pranks he makes are legends for the young generation of the Green Jumpers, and Gamakichi and his brothers are waiting to be summoned for that special mission. With that thought in mind, Naruto looked up in the mirror and saw the blonde with the wide grin, who looked back at him mischievously. He nodded to himself and, washing his hands, thought on how many summons he will need. He reached for the towel and, drying his hands, scratched his chest. The itching was getting as annoying as he can be, and he looked down frowning. What he saw surprised him at first, but it soon turned into fear, with the thought of the demon seal changing. He quickly looked at his stomach, but there, everything was okay. So what could that be? That thought led him to his teacher, and he scowled, realizing that pervert must have done something in his drunken state as he was asleep. He got angry and sharply turned back to the room to put on the pants and storm into his sensei's room to show him what he thinks of it. It took him less than a minute, and the loud bang of the roughly pushed door as he entered spread through the corridor of the second floor. The scene he came to see was another shock, though less troubling. By the window, at the table, Jiraiya talked with Itachi, and they had a tea. They didn't speak to each other at all before, so that surprised him. But even though he was confused, he had to take care of the business with his teacher first. He turned to the white-haired man and glared as much as he could. "What the hell did you do, pervert? We had a deal. No messing with a fucking seal, remember?" His teacher brought his brows together and shouted, "You're making too much of a hustle. Close the door at the least." The blonde glared some more, and angrily turning, pushed the door closed with a force. "Don't get angry, Naruto-kun," the guest asked softly, and the boy looked at him with the narrowed eyes that had a warning of not messing with him. Seeing that expression, the man smiled, liking the fact that the boy could be serious, and tried to seem intimidating. "The hell are you smiling at?" He spat a lot quieter, but the tone got angrier. Itachi smirked and Jiraiya soundly sighed. The boy turned to him and then again to the guest. He looked at them closely, and his face lost its malice when he pouted. You both have something to do with it, aren't you? His teacher pressed his lips together and turned away, refusing to start the explanation. Itachi saw that and inwardly cursed the man for leaving him to deal with the blonde. Come here, Naruto-kun. The boy reluctantly complied and sat by the table. The man ignored his orange pants and shirtless chest for a moment, and after the strange silence that covered them for some time, his right hand rested on the seal above the boy's heart. Naruto's gaze fell on his hand quizzically. That seal was placed by me, he said and pulled back. The blue eyes followed his hand and then rose to his black ones. They stared at each other in question, Itachi waiting for any reaction, the boy waiting for an explanation. We didn't ask you because I knew you will be against it, stated the white-haired man, turning to his student. You don't have to worry about it. The seal isn't active yet. Naruto frowned and his gaze turned to Uchiha again. Then, what did you seal there? He asked, knowing that Itachi did something his teacher approved of, and it captured his interest. The man tried to form some complicated sentences in his mind to make the boy lost in the meaning of his actions, but he just knew that in the end, it would be pointless, so saying the truth was better. He looked up and hesitated. What if Naruto really didn't want for their souls to be inseparable? He should have asked first, but Jiraiya said that they didn't have time to deal with it, and even if the boy wanted, he would still be against it. But you can never guess what his reaction will be. It is always strange when you don't expect it in the least. The older man got tired of waiting and looked at his student. Didn't I teach you anything? Look at it, what do you see? You prefer spending your time behind the wall of the hot springs. Not teaching me, muttered the boy, looking down at himself. Hearing that, the raven-haired man coldly looked at the hermit from across the table, and his eyes dangerously started to spin as they turned red, revealing Sharingan. Jiraiya noticed that and turned away, thinking now he's protective over the brat. I swear this child will be protected by the whole Akatsuki before they decide to capture him. Puzzled, the blonde stared at the new addition to decorations on his body. Well, it seals chakra, that much is evident. And something spiritual too. But, separately, then there's some troublesome and complicated circulation system. Don't know. What did you mean it's inactive? It's not finished yet, or what? He asked, looking up at his teacher. Yes, you won't use it for quite some time, said the man, turning his gaze back on their guest. Seeing that, the boy got a little scared. He still didn't know what they sealed there. But if Itachi had something to do with it, that must be something serious. He gulped, glancing at Itachi, and then their eyes met. The seal will activate when I die, the man softly admitted. And when it does, you will receive my abilities, and among them, Uchiha bloodline. Shocked, the blonde had widened eyes and his mind processed the said sentence time after time until he realized what that meant. Are you crazy? I don't need that thing, he shouted, waving his arms, stressing it. What do you mean after you die? You're still quite alive, god damn it. The hermit smirked at the missing Nin and tilted his head. Told you so. This will make you stronger, Naruto-kun. Don't you want to be strong enough to bring back Sasuke? To protect your friends? Konoha? Inquired the raven-haired man, frowning. The boy stood up from his sit angrily. Not this way. I want to get stronger on my own. Not because someone gave me their power. Itachi blinked, then quietly sighed. There's more to it than that. You will have my knowledge and… Are you insane? The blonde incredulously stared at the man, not understanding why he would do something like this. And then he just shook his head and, as loudly as he entered, left. Completely shocked about his reaction, Itachi dumbly stared at the space in front of him, while Jiraiya started to pity the man. He stood up and awkwardly put his hand on the man's shoulder, trying to comfort him for a brief moment. Stay here, Itachi. I'll talk with the brat and we'll be back, the hermit voiced and left to find his student. I just knew it, he thought, walking out of the building and looking around. He doesn't care if it was Itachi's soul, heart, or whatever else sealed inside. He just wouldn't take the power like that. Like Kyuubi. It is with him, inside, but he wants to prove that he will win no matter what without using its chakra. And with the gift Itachi gives him, it will be the same. He may later have those abilities, but it would take extremely important, dangerous, and hopeless situation for him to use it. He saw his student on the roof of the highest building, not too far from his position, and made his way there. He quickly appeared behind the blonde and started to lecture him. "Don't be stupid, Gaki. The chance like this appears once in a lifetime. The guy wants to give you his power. Just take it for God's sake." The blonde turned around to face him, and his distress was clearly seen. "I don't want it. It's his. Why is he doing it? He feels he's in debt with me? I don't care. It's too much." A bit of moisture formed in the corners of his eyes. Jiraiya scowled and placed his hands on his student's shoulders to keep him steady in place. He spoke in a serious tone. "Now listen to me. I don't care why he's doing this. I don't care if he's in debt or just wants to share. I care for you. And that means that I want you to take what he's offering." The blonde turned his face away, not willing to look at his teacher. "He's everything you're not. Smart, precise, dangerous, and heartless. He will become a part of you. Give you everything, Naruto." The man continued in a whisper. "He seals his soul here. Do you understand?" The boy was ready to cry. Did he understand? Of course he did. Shinobi of different nations are dreaming of gaining the bloodline of Uchiha or Hyuga clans. To all of them, Hatake Kakashi was the example of power it gave a ninja who wasn't born with it. If any of them was in his position, they wouldn't have any objections. Quite the opposite, they would seek that kind of offer and situation. But he always had to prove to people that he is what he is. Not a demon, not an idiot, not a failure. If he uses the fox's power, and then Itachi's, no one will ever consider him a true shinobi. They will think of him as lucky guy who uses someone else's power. "I checked everything. You won't turn into a killer or anything, he will never control you, and you won't hear his voice inside your head. Yes, you will have his memories, even his feelings, but it will always be your choice what to do with it," the older man said, and crouched in front of the blonde. He sighed and shook him slightly, making the boy look at his wrinkled face. "Look, maybe he gives you strength to protect his younger brother, maybe he hates Akatsuki and this is his little revenge, or maybe he's just that noble. The fact is, he trusts you with his afterlife, and this is the greatest gift I saw anyone give to anybody." Staring for a minute at his white-haired sensei, Naruto was looking for lies, deceiving, or signs of manipulation, but found none. The man was sincere and he really wanted what's the best for him. He looked down at his feet and wiped his eyes with his left hand, before any single tear slid down. "So, a soul, you say?" The man nodded. "And I won't turn into a brooding Uchiha who's betraying the village once he gets a chance." The man grinned and shook his head in negative. "All right." Jiraiya let out a breath he was holding and, relieved, stood up. "Come on. The seal isn't finished." He turned and started to walk off in direction of a hotel. "We have to add his chakra to that circulation system." Back in the room where they left their guest, they found Itachi still sitting by the table, but his posture was different. He leaned on the table with elbows, and his entwined fingers of both hands were pressed to his forehead, effectively shadowing his face. It looked like he spent in that position the whole time they were gone. Jiraiya guessed that Itachi prepared himself for rejection and didn't hope for Naruto coming back with a changed mind. The hermit decided that his student must take care of it since he was the cause of it, so he pushed him forward slightly and turned to leave. "I have to get a drink." The door closed, and Itachi slowly lowered his hands. The blonde, wearing a mesh shirt on his torso now, strode to him hesitantly. "I am sorry," he mumbled, and Itachi shook his head. "No, don't be. I should have talked with you first." "I know Jiraiya convinced you not to," the boy replied, biting his lower lip. "It's not about me not wanting power. It's about me not wanting to use what does not belong to me," he explained. Itachi's features relaxed, and the corner of his lips raised a little. "I didn't say you will have to use it." He pointedly looked at the boy. "Just have it, Naruto-kun. There may come a day when you will need it, so if that happens, consider that me helping you." The boy silently nodded. "Did Jiraiya-sen tell you about the seal?" Itachi asked, hoping that he wouldn't have to explain everything. "Yeah." Naruto scratched the back of his head. "Though, I wonder." "Yes." The blonde sighed, closing his eyes and let his arms fall at his sides. "Why me? I mean, why not Sasuke or Whoever you no longer and better than me. The man stared at him. What should he say? There was absolutely no reason for that decision, Naruto-kun? Or, why do you think there is anyone I no longer and better? He could say that Naruto shouldn't know his reasons, but that would be suspicious. I trust you, he simply said. That could mean a lot of things. Trust you to keep my secrets. Trust you to make the right decisions. Trust you with my knowledge, my heart and my feelings. Trust you to take what I give and keep it. Orange-clad Jinchuriki blinked to that and nodded once. Itachi didn't know how the blonde interpreted the meaning behind his words, but the boy seemed satisfied with it. Maybe the trust in itself was enough to explain his actions. He decided to change the direction of the talk and spoke. We'll seal some of my chakra today. It will be stored until the moment you unseal it, and only then will it cause the physical aspects of the seal to appear. That means that until then, it will be inactive. How do we do that? Asked the boy, glancing at his chest and frowning. Itachi stood up and walked to the bed. He sat and beckoned the blonde to sit by him. Naruto raised a brow at that. The man frowned, not understanding the look. I'll show you the hand seals. The technique you'll use will open your chakra circulation system to take in the foreign chakra. The technique I'll use will direct my chakra to the seal and keep it there. Naruto exhaled, relieved, and strode to the man. He sat on his right. The man could only guess what the boy imagined a moment before, but he didn't want to ponder over that, so he turned to him and started to show the hand seals. There were 8, easy to remember, and the blonde repeated them about 5 times to make sure he didn't make a mistake. What it will feel like? The blonde asked the moment Itachi was ready to start. It stopped him in his tracks and he frowned. I don't know. Shocked, the blonde glared at him. What do you mean you don't know? What if it hurts? Itachi frowned deeper, but then he relaxed and raised his right brow. Are you scared of pain, Naruto-kun? No. But you can warn me, the boy shouted childishly. All right, it may hurt, the man answered tonelessly. The blonde stared at him for a long moment, but then he sighed tiredly and started to make the seals. Itachi easily caught up with him, and after the last seal he took Naruto's left hand in his. They didn't move and Naruto observed Itachi's hand that was holding his. Do you feel anything? The man inquired, watching the blonde. The boy shook his head, and after a minute he frowned. Maybe that didn't work? I don't feel any tea. Oh. What? Itachi asked, seeing the boy's surprised expression. My head is spinning, was the response. Itachi firmly held his hand and observed him. That won't take too long, he muttered, but then the blonde started to slightly swing. His blue eyes rose to the ceiling and he gulped. I don't like that, Itachi, he whispered. I'm falling. His swings got wider and he almost fell on his back. Itachi turned slightly and pulled the blonde on his lap. He held him close. The blonde's head fell on his shoulder. You're not falling. I am holding you, he said, feeling his chakra leave him. It took only a minute longer for the last of his reserves to transfer to Naruto, and he put the boy, who was unconscious, on the bed, pulling the sheets over him. The seal on the boy's chest was gleaming, and his left hand unconsciously touched it. Seeing that, Itachi had the urge to smile. He gave all of his chakra and was tired, but he had to go. He leaned over the blonde and let his lips touch his forehead. Then he rose and walking slowly left the room. Downstairs he saw Jiraiya sipping coffee by the table, in the dining room. He walked to him and without looking up, the older man lifted his arm and in his palm was a small scroll. Itachi took it and Jiraiya got back to the drink. On the table were notes and other scrolls. It looked like he was writing another of his books. What is this? Asked Itachi, glancing at the scroll. From the corner of his eye, Jiraiya looked up and scowled. This is your alibi. He turned back to his writings and scribed something. You parted with your partner to meet with an informant, but I assume you don't have one in here. There you will find all the recent news and rumors of the Rock Country. I don't want anyone to know of what's transpiring in here, not even Hokage, and I expect of you the same, he said sternly, and Itachi nodded once, to show that he agrees with this decision. He took a soldier pill from his pouch and swallowed. Then, without saying goodbye as before, he left. 3 days later found Jiraiya and Naruto in the town on the border of the rock country. After an intense training they had a meal the blonde insisted on, and sat by the table in a small tavern, where the older man kept repeating that he's not satisfied with the old women that served the food there. It was evening and Jiraiya let himself get a bottle of sake, muttering that it made the world look prettier. Naruto guessed that meant that his vision blurred when he was drunk, so at that point all the ladies were beautiful in his opinion. He himself whined a bit about the food being made of vegetables, while he has always wanted ramen. All in all, they were quits. He picked something green and almost grimaced chewing the meal. His teacher would have smirked if he noticed that, but he was lost in thoughts and his gaze was directed at his student's chest, making the teen uncomfortable. "What are you thinking of, Itachi?" he asked, hoping to wake the hermit. The man blinked and looked at the blonde. "I think I won't teach you ninjutsu or anything about weapons," the man replied casually. "What? You can't do that," shouted the boy indignantly and waved with his hands. He was ready to jump from his sit and hit the pervert. "Calm down. When you'll get Itachi's memories you'll know more jutsu than I could ever possibly teach you. So why lose our precious time teaching you something you'll get later anyway?" The blonde stared at him stunned. He was shocked, but that quickly turned into anger. "And what if I get those memories of his in 20 years? The hermit choked and coughed, but he held his emotions inside, and it was his turn to stare at his student with shock. "Are you calling Itachi stupid?" "I didn't say that," the teen quickly answered. "You think he would be stupid not to realize that he could find someone else in the future?" the man asked incredulously. He shook his head at the boy's foolishness and continued. "He did that because he knows that he will die soon. I don't know how he's going to die or how he knows that, but it must happen pretty damn soon. That's why he's in a hurry." Naruto leaned back in his sit, shocked even more. Jiraiya was right. It was the only logical explanation of Itachi's actions. And these strange questions he asked. He asked what he thought of Sasuke, how he was going to find him, save him, protect him, what's behind it. Did he test him? What for? What Itachi really wants. He gives him his soul and his abilities, and wants to know how far Naruto will go to save his friend. He wants to help Sasuke? He wants to save Sasuke. He wants to help him protect his friend, because his friend is Itachi's brother. What the hell all that meant? Isn't Itachi the bad guy that kills his family, hurts his sibling, and hunts down the innocent vessels of the Bijou? Despite his cold exterior, Itachi is not crazy, and he is not a heartless killer, even though he is perfect shinobi. And the fact that he helps Naruto and wants to protect his brother says entirely different story about the man. Who is Uchiha Itachi? And what is really behind the facade of a killing machine? 1 month later. The training of Rasengan went nicely, even though it caused a lot of destruction around. The noon graced the field somewhere in a tea country with the burning sun and a slight, warm wind that didn't help in dispersing the dust that covered the area after another explosion. All around were the pits in the ground and destroyed trees, showing the level of damage the technique could cause. The blonde coughed and waved his hand, grimacing at the result. He glanced further with the narrowed eyes and they widened, seeing the familiar face. "Itachi," he greeted, widely smiling. The man stood by the tree that was yet to be touched and he softly smiled at the beaming face of the blonde. He walked forward toward him through the dust. "Naruto-kun. Found a time to visit?" the teen asked, even though it was obvious. The man slightly nodded and unzipped his cloak. He stopped by the tree behind the blonde and put his cloak under it, revealing him in black clothing. Black shinobi pants, black t-shirt, black mesh shirt, sandals, black too. His necklace, as Naruto noticed before, was gray but as dark as the rest. He saw all that since the day he put the first bandage over the man's injuries, but Itachi was healthy now, and his looks were somehow different. The man sat on his cloak under a tree and looked up at the teen. "I have a bit of time. We'll seal my blood today," he announced and noticed that Naruto's face paled. "Blood? The hell? Why didn't you tell me earlier?" he asked surprised. Itachi calmly gazed at him. "Chakra is not enough to transfer the bloodline. It requires the blood itself. I didn't tell you earlier because I thought you realized it from the beginning." He muttered tonelessly, which angered the blonde even more. Not wanting to throw his anger at the man, the blonde went across the field to another tree, where he sharply picked up his jacket and headband, and then he got back to the man and put it there. Instead of anger, he felt nervous now, and Itachi's silence didn't help. He still stood by him not knowing what to do, but he somehow felt that Itachi was amused by that, even though he didn't show it. "Sit down. I'll show you the seals." He softly motioned for the blonde to get down, and Naruto sat in front of him with the legs crossed. The man raised his hands and very slowly made the 12 hand signs, repeating them for the teen. This technique will tie the blood to the seal and keep it inactive until the moment you unseal the physical aspects of it. The blonde nodded and repeated the hand signs. He almost shrieked when Itachi pulled him closer, and he could swear he saw the grin on the man's face when he pressed his back to his chest. He couldn't see Itachi's face now because the raven-haired man was behind, but he lifted his right pale hand for the blonde to look. "You want to cut or to bite?" Itachi asked seriously, but in his tone was the slight note of humor, as if he wanted to laugh, but held it in. The blonde looked at the hand presented to him and grimaced. "Cut," he answered, and Itachi took kunai in his left hand. "Make the seals," he said, cutting his wrist under the blonde's eyes, and Naruto did so, noticing that the seal on his chest for a moment gleamed. He gulped, seeing the blood stream out the small cut, and hesitantly, his hands touched the pale hand of the man. He prepared himself to feel strange sensations, unpleasant headaches, and whatever else may come, and under the man's stare he gently lifted the hand and his lips covered the small wound on the wrist. Just as he expected, the taste was metallic, salty too. What else there was to expect? Itachi was human too after all, and his blood couldn't be different. He carefully let the blood flow into his mouth, sipping. A moment later, he felt warmth spread through him, and he relaxed, liking the feeling. He closed his eyes and sucked a little to get more of it. Itachi's left hand encircled him and pressed him to the man's chest tighter, but he barely noticed. He swallowed and had the urge to hold the man's hand more firmly, to get more of that taste and bite his skin, letting his teeth sink into it, but he didn't like the fact that he wanted it. So he continued to be careful and gentle. He didn't want to bruise the man's hand. Itachi waited. He felt as Naruto relaxed and started to like the drink. He prepared the blood pills beforehand, and enjoyed the sight of the blonde reveling in the taste. He looked engrossed in the action, and even though he was gentle, it didn't look like he planned to let go. He gave him one more minute before deciding that it was enough. "That's enough for now, Naruto-kun," he whispered. The blonde opened his eyes and saw Itachi's left hand raise the prepared bandage. He stopped sucking and instead lightly licked the wound. He heard a sharp intake of breath from the man at the action, and repeated it with pleasure. Itachi suppressed a shudder and saw the blonde take the bandage and wrapping it around his wrist carefully. Then, making the last small knot, the blonde placed his hand down over the left hand that was above his stomach, letting Itachi's hands fully encircle him, and leaned back to his chest, sighing with content. Itachi could stand up and leave him like that, but he didn't want to. He looked down at the face of the teen and wondered if he fell asleep. His left hand rose and found a blood pill in his pouch. He swallowed it, and looking down again he found the blue eyes opened, half-lidded, but still. He could see the reflection of the tree they were under and the cloudy sky in them, and remembered that his own black eyes never reflected the world around. The blonde lifted their right hands and looked at Itachi's bandaged one. He straightened the palm and fingers and looked at it closely. People say that if fingers are longer than a palm, it is the sign that the person relies on his mind and logic. And if the palm is longer than fingers, it is the sign that the person heavily relies on his heart. The blonde muttered, stroking the man's pale and long fingers. "You're very smart, Itachi." The man looked down at their hands and had to agree with that logic. "Then it means that you have a very big heart," he replied, and frowned when the blonde entwined their fingers and, raising their hands, kissed Itachi's. "Also, you're a good liar," the teen added, and fully turned around, facing the man. He let his legs almost encircle Itachi, and he let his hands rest against the man's chest. He continued in a whisper, "You've managed to convince the whole world, everyone, that you're a heartless killer, murderer, criminal." he said, leaning closer to Itachi's face. Everyone, but me. He stared in the man's eyes, and then his gaze fell on the lines that traveled from under his eyes to his cheeks. His hands gripped the man's shirt in fists, and he leaned even closer, pressing his lips lightly to the man's for a short moment. Itachi was lost. The moment the teen breathed out the last sentence, his heart stopped. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. And then those lips touched his, as if to prove the said words. He stared at the face close to his and noticed that the blue eyes were still half-lidded in tiredness. "You're affected by the seal, Naruto-kun," he stated, and at these words the blue orbs widened in surprise, but a moment later the blonde smirked. He leaned in again. "Maybe." His right hand rose to Itachi's face and his thumb traced the line on the man's face. "You think I didn't notice? The way you touched your headband, the way your fingers traced the symbol of the village, gently, lovingly." He breathed out and his thumb slowly slid down the man's jawline. "That gesture is done by those who love their village, and you are one of them." He leaned to the man's lips again. "Don't." Itachi managed to whisper back and his left arm rose to the boy's shoulder to stop him. He felt his heart start to beat loudly in his chest, scaring him. The left hand of the blonde gripped his shirt even tighter and the fingers of his right appeared behind the man's head. Those fingers combed the black hairs. "No, don'ts," the teen whispered back and firmly pressed their lips together. When Jiraiya got back to the clearing, he raised a brow seeing his student walk left and right, nervously pressing his left-fisted hand to his mouth. It looked like he paced in that manner for the last half an hour, not seeing the world around. His jacket was left under a tree and the dust that should have covered the field in a mist and smoke was absent. The narrowed eyes of the blonde danced looking seemingly nowhere and Jiraiya wondered what happened while he was away. He patiently waited for 5 minutes, hoping that Naruto would notice him and say what got him distressed, but he got tired of lack of attention and sighed. "Brat," he loudly called and the blonde looked up. His blue eyes widened and after a short pause in his steps, he strode to the man, with his expression of a mix of embarrassment, anger and fear. "That fucking seal of yours has side effects." The white-haired man frowned at that proclamation and crossed his arms. He waited for the rest of the monologue and the details. "I'm a freaking gay now." Jiraiya, surprised, frowned even deeper. "What? You can't be serious." The blonde faced the man and anxiously raised his arms in the air. "I am in love with Itachi." He covered his face with his hands and made a strange sound. That followed a short silence, in which Jiraiya started to believe the blonde wanted to pull a prank on him. Though the nature of the joke surprised him, and the fashion in which the blonde did it was unlike him. "I kissed him. Oh my God. I feel like an idiot." The boy continued through his palms, sounding scared. The hermit gazed at him stunned, as he processed the information frozen in place. Naruto kissing Itachi? No, that must be some sort of joke. "Wait, why do you say it's the side effect of the seal?" He managed to ask, furrowing his forehead, and the hands of the blonde slightly slid lower, down his face. "What else could it be? Besides, Itachi stated so when I—" He stopped in mid-sentence and closed his eyes. He was utterly embarrassed. His behavior probably scared Itachi off and freaked him out. He himself was shocked. When he woke up and came to his senses, he realized what happened. But Itachi was gone, and he didn't know if he should feel sad or happy about it. He wanted to apologize, but at the same time he didn't know if he could face the man. How did Itachi react to that? He didn't expect that, that was for sure. But was he angered or didn't care? No, there was definitely fear in those black eyes, but it could be caused by his words too. Oh damn, what the pile of shit did he throw then? There's no way Itachi will ever feel safe around him again. And the man tried to stop him too. Though he didn't try hard, but he was shocked, so that's understandable. The whole thing just went completely wrong. Thank heavens it didn't go further. Though he couldn't deny that he liked the position they were in. No, stop that train of thought. What the hell is going on? That seal must be the source of these stupid emotions. Truth be told, I didn't think that adding his chakra and blood would cause a physical attraction. That's really interesting. I have to make some notes about it and check if it's right, muttered Jiraiya, stroking his chin with his forefinger, as he watched the sky above. not paying that much attention to his troubled student. The blonde stared at him dumbfounded, as his hands were still covering the most of his face. "Did you hear what I said?" "Kissed, Itachi," spoke the teen, not comprehending the reaction of his teacher. The man looked down on him quizzically, and then, as if remembering what was the situation about, he opened his mouth with an "oh" and said, "So what? Do you want me to stay close the next time he visits and make sure you don't get to make out?" The blonde had eyes widened and his jaw fell as he gaped at his teacher. He couldn't get how Jiraiya took the situation so lightly. Didn't he care if he was involved with a man? Did he think that it was a joke? "No, thanks. I'm embarrassed enough as it is. But if you would be so kind to check this seal and fix that problem, I'd be grateful." The blonde replied in a rare serious tone, still shaken about what happened. He just knew the man was amused and was inspired with that for that book of his. But he could do nothing to change that. Jiraiya was a pervert after all. And he definitely wouldn't let the man observe them when they were, well, together. He got used to the intimacy and secrecy with Itachi, and he didn't want to lose that, even though today happened something that could destroy their relationship. But, knowing Itachi and Uchiha as a whole, he would bet that the next time Itachi appears, he will behave as if nothing happened. 1.5 months later. Sitting by the table in a hotel room, and writing the last chapter for his new novel, Jiraiya smirked. He felt that chakra again, and it meant Itachi appeared once more. He could swear the kid was looking for the reasons to spend time with his student. It was almost funny how these two were so much alike and unlike each other. Maybe that was the thing that got them together. He frowned, remembering the time of the Uchiha massacre and the rumors, events, and what's more important, quietness behind it. He was always suspicious of that thing, and he felt that there was more to it than some young, perfect, and loyal shinobi going on the rampage. Especially when that young shinobi is so good at controlling his emotions and is quite sane. Or maybe he didn't need to know what was behind it. Some things are better left unsaid, like the fact that there existed the seal that could transfer not only soul, but abilities from one man to another. He scowled, realizing that keeping Naruto conscious about what was transpiring was risky. The teen sucked at illusions, and anyone skilled enough could force him to spill everything. He himself could keep the greatest secrets and no one would ever get a hold of it, while Itachi had Sharingan, and that said all, not mentioning his abnormal skills in Genjutsu. But Naruto, while the brat could keep his mouth shut, it wouldn't stop the other shinobi from getting inside his head and finding out about things that Jiraiya wished were kept locked. There was a knock on the door, and Itachi entered, emotionless as always. "Naruto's in the next room. I won't disturb you. I believe this is the last time you visit," Jiraiya asked, looking up from the papers. The raven-haired, cloaked man nodded and turned to leave, when the hermit spoke again. "I will take away his memories before we get back to Konoha, just to be safe. He will receive them back with yours." Itachi thought for a long moment, thinking over the matter. He didn't reply to that, agreeing with Jiraiya's reasoning in the end, and without another word, he left, closing the door behind him. Without a knock, he entered the next room to find Naruto reading a scroll on his bed. He was focused to the point of scowling and didn't show that he heard someone entering. The room was a mess, and the blonde was in orange pants and the black mesh shirt, while his headband rested on his pillow again, and he didn't place his sandals in the proper place by the door but under his bed, which seemed to be Naruto-like. Itachi softly closed the door and strode to him, wondering if the blonde knew who was in the room. He casually sat by the teen on his left and waited for being noticed. Naruto thought that it was Jiraiya, who never knocked entering, and after rereading the complicated line he couldn't understand again. He glanced to the left to confirm it but saw the red cloud on the black fabric and almost shrieked and jumped, realizing that it was someone else. His eyes looked up and he saw Itachi's face. That relaxed him somewhat and he sighed, relieved, pressing his left hand to his chest to somehow stop his racing heart. He could swear he saw amusement in Itachi's eyes, and he glared in response, to show what he thought of that kind of unexpected entrance. He saw that amusement in those eyes did not disappear, so he gave up and turned away, putting the scroll aside. He looked back at the man, and between them formed a soft silence, as they gazed at each other. Finally, it was broken by Itachi. "We'll perform the last sealing today." The blonde nodded, and to get more comfortable, Itachi took his cloak off. He let it fall on the floor, not really bothering with creating more mess. will seal the spiritual chakra, and it may cause you the giddiness, like before. He continued sitting down and raised his hands. Naruto looked down at them, knowing that he had to remember the seals, and Itachi started to perform them slowly, observing Naruto's eyes. Then he observed his hands, as he repeated the signs, and inwardly, somehow wished he could hold them again. The blonde nodded, showing that he was ready, and Itachi hesitantly, carefully, pulled him closer, on his lap. Naruto didn't struggle against it, he even preferred to sit like this, knowing that his head may start to spin, and he felt better knowing that Itachi will keep him steady. He made the hand signs and the seal gleamed, as he rested his head on the man's shoulder. Itachi looked down and asked, "Are you affected by the seal now?" The blonde scowled and looked away. "Don't ask me that." The man tilted his head. "But I have to know if you will behave like the last time." "You just want to embarrass me," muttered the teen, shutting his eyes and grimacing. Itachi smirked down at him. "Chinen. Don't answer me with that Uchiha syllable." The teen shouted, glaring sideways, refusing to look at the man, because he felt that he blushed. 2 seconds later he heard a very quiet laugh, and surprised, he quickly looked up. But Itachi's face was stoic as ever, as if he never ever smiled. Looking closely, the blonde saw the corner of Itachi's lips quiver, and he knew that he caused him to laugh, though he regretted not seeing it. He grinned and sat with his legs on either side of the man, and rose on his knees slightly, to have a better view of Itachi's face. The man noticed the glint in Naruto's eyes and wondered what trouble that meant. "You laughed." The blonde started, and pressed his hands on the man's chest. "So, let's see." He mumbled and grinned even wider. I ask Sasuke, "Hey, Sasuke, are you tired?" And then I hear Achin. The blonde noticed Itachi's lips quiver a bit more, so he continued. And then I ask, "Hey, Sasuke, are you sure we chose the right road back?" And he answers me with a Achin. Damn, how the hell the human being is supposed to understand if that means yes or a no? He shouted at the end, and Itachi trembled as he pressed his lips so hard it looked like a grimace. It lasted for a second, because then, he laughed loudly with his eyes closed. It was so natural and unnatural that Naruto stared at him, stunned. The man shook so hard that he fell on his back and held his stomach. The blonde grinned at that and saw Itachi try to raise his right hand to cover his mouth. Try, because Naruto stopped him and held this arm, to see the face of the man clearly. After what seemed like eternity, Itachi calmed down and with a small smile stared up at the boy. Naruto stared back, still grinning, and then he leaned down and after a moment of hesitation, started to kiss the man. The shock was absent, the technique was done. Itachi was doubtful again, and he didn't respond to the kiss even though he wanted to. He couldn't believe that it was anything but the seal influencing the teen, and it made him feel uncomfortable. The blonde pulled back and stared in his eyes. "Don't want to, or scared?" quietly asked the blonde, gazing down. Itachi didn't want to speak. His expression turned serious, and the teen saw the fear and pain in his eyes. "You're scared," the blonde muttered and smiled sadly. He straightened his back, so that he sat on the man. "I'm not affected by the seal. Well, not enough to be controlled by it." Erosenin checked it and confirmed it. He gazed down at Itachi and waited for any kind of response. The man just stared back, as if examining the picture presented to him. The teen sighed and closed his eyes. "If you don't want to, forget everything and we part like friends if you want to dash." Before he got to finish the sentence, Itachi was up and claiming his lips feverishly. He pressed him closer, holding his back, and the blonde smiled through the kiss, feeling that the man was finally losing control. Itachi licked the teen's lips and he parted them, encircling the neck of the man with his arms, while on the mission concerning finding Sasuke, who at that time found Itachi. When he saw the blonde in the forest, he didn't know how he should react to this. He didn't know if he should hide from his eyes or let himself be seen. He knew that it was only a clone, one of many around, and he knew that it is the last time they meet. He made a slow intake of breath and formed an illusion, letting the teen see his body form from the ravens. And while the blonde was under that technique, he got closer to him and fought the urge to change everything, to change his plans, his ambitions, change the future he put ahead of himself, his brother and Naruto. It hurt him when he thought on what Naruto will feel. He was causing him the greatest pain a person can experience. He was so sorry. He closed his eyes and stilled his heart. He knew that both of them were stronger than that. He smiled and asked aloud, "What will you do if Sasuke attacks Konoha? Will you protect your village, or will you protect your friend?" "I would do both," was the answer, the same as before. Itachi sadly smiled at that and made a step closer, facing the teen. "I will gift you with a bit of my power," he said aloud and kissed the blonde, still keeping him trapped in illusion. It was him saying goodbye, and he prayed that Naruto will understand him and forgive him. He quickly left after that to find his sibling. Back in Konoha, Naruto's apartment, when he knew that Sasuke killed Itachi. He lay in his bed thinking back on the moment when he met Sasuke's brother. Itachi trapped him in Genjutsu again, but he couldn't place the man's behavior. His clone didn't find any details. He didn't know if that was Itachi's clone or if there was a particular reason for the man to act strange. He knew that there was something more. But what? He asked himself time after time why Sasuke killed his brother. He was utterly shocked, because he believed that his former teammate would never commit that act. After all, despite the fact that Itachi was a murderer, the man was still his brother. Why not settle their problems once and for all without bloodshed and behave like normal people? Why kill each other? He couldn't believe his friend got so far with his revenge. He wasted the half of his life for it, and what now? Did it make Sasuke happy? Has he calmed now and travels back to Konoha? Why did it seem like Itachi didn't share that hatred with his brother? Wasn't it strange that he kept telling Sasuke that his hatred was always too small? Always not enough? As if he wanted Sasuke to hate him so much that Sasuke would kill him. He closed his eyes, confused, and turned on his other side. He was sure he will get a headache if he continues to think over the matter so hard, but he couldn't help it. He scratched his left shoulder and chest, and frowned at his train of thoughts. He could talk with Sakura about it, but she would take Sasuke's side and state that Itachi deserved it. He could talk with Kakashi, but he didn't know how the man would react to that topic. And then there was Tsunade or Jiraiya, but he didn't want to bother them when they had more important things to ponder on. The itching got annoying and he frowned, scratching the skin over his heart. He rose slightly and lifted his shirt, wondering what sore or the dirt could get there. He looked down and stared at the strange gleaming marks that softly pulsed, scaring him somewhat. And then out of nowhere, in his mind appeared a picture of Itachi. It was him smiling. And then more and more and more. And he knew it couldn't be his imagination. It was too real. Itachi glaring, Itachi scowling, Itachi smirking and even pouting. Why did he see these scenes? Where did it come from? He gasped, remembering the laughing face of the man, and then he just sat on his bed dumbly, numb. One scene after another entered his mind and he panted, shocked by this. He couldn't move or make a sound. The moments of Itachi's life, so beautiful and ugly, scaring and stunning, were before his eyes, and he was speechless at the truths, lies and suffering around him. Behind that mask was so much pain and hurt that he wanted to stop it, erase it, and do something just to take it all away. He felt the trembling inside the man's hand every time he raised it to kill, but his movements were fluid and perfect, unlike the emotions he hid so well. Everywhere, all the time, the blood, the red color, the screams, tortures. Where was the end to this? Itachi washed his hands off blood, off the liquid that followed him, pursued him, haunted him everywhere he was, everywhere he went. He wanted to run, to hide from it, and he couldn't. He wanted to stop, to forget all this, and he couldn't. And then Itachi was calm. He held the form of Naruto in his arms as he slept and didn't want to let go. He stroked the tanned skin, and suddenly there was nothing he feared. And then his hands were kissed, and there was nothing in this world he would want to feel in exchange for this. He saw as Itachi's hand, slowly and gracefully, lifted in the air and got closer to the trembling form of Sasuke, utterly scaring him. But then, it turned out to be just a fillip on the forehead. Sorry, Sasuke, there won't be next time. It was over. Sasuke did this. He killed Itachi. Killed Tachi. The tears appeared in the corners of his eyes and quickly slid down his face, to his chin, and he wanted to scream, to shout so loud to free the emotion that gathered in his chest and was causing him so much pain that he thought his body will rip itself into pieces. He was gasping for air, but it wasn't enough to breathe, and he shook violently, feeling his soul tear and burst out of him in anguish. It was too late. There was nothing he could do. There was no one he could stop. He wanted to, he'd pray to, but he knew too much. He knew it was too late. And there was no hope for anything. And in his suffering, he was alone. Who knew the truth? Who could do anything? Why there was no one close to Itachi to stop it? Why he didn't remember all of this? If he did, he would. He raised his hand to his mouth to stop the scream that threatened to release itself out of his body, and quietly wept. Sasuke, you bastard. You motherfucking son of a bitch. He didn't know how long his mind and attention were gone, but he knew that it was only the start of his reaction to what happened. He was still in shock and only vaguely comprehended the situation. He didn't want to leave his apartment. He didn't want to see anyone. And what's more, he couldn't let anyone see him. He was a mess, and he didn't want to change that. He wanted to suffer and cry, and he wanted to do so alone. Some time later, he summoned the small toad, having a careful plan formed in his mind. The green and smiling animal appeared in the puff of smoke and waved with its foot in a greeting. Naruto. The blonde was sitting on his bed and writing something on the piece of paper. The toad frowned, seeing his expression. It was different from those he saw seeing the blonde before. And it was more than sad. It was filled with pain and the new level of loneliness. Are you all right? The toad asked. No, but I will be, was the quiet reply, and the voice almost cracked. You look like shit, exclaimed the animal, shocked. Yeah, thanks for reminding me, said the blonde and slightly glared at the animal. He finished writing and turned to the waiting toad. Gamitsuki, I'll put on you the transformation technique, turning you into Katsuyu. With that list, you'll go to the market, to the medicine center. Here the blonde took some money and gave them to the animal. If they ask you any questions, you'll say that it is for Tsunade. You'll buy these things and bring it to me. Okay? The toad nodded and took the items. The blonde made some hand seals and touched the summoned animal. The toad turned into the slug and uncharacteristically disappeared through the window. End of flashback. Konoha Hospital, present time. Inoichi opened his eyes and blinked down at the sleeping form of the teen. His fingers pulled away from his temples, and the man looked up, noticing that everyone was still in the room, though the pink-haired girl was sitting in a chair now and Danzu leaned on the wall. He guessed that some hours had passed since he started to use the memory viewing technique. Tsunade noticed him moving and turned to look at him, waiting to hear what he found out. He inwardly cringed, realizing what consequences his speech may have. The occupants of the room watched him questioningly, and Danzu tapped the floor with his cane lightly. So, what did you see, Inoichi? What took you so long? An aged man asked, narrowing his eye. The jounin bit his tongue and quickly formulated his response. He shrugged, closing his eyes, and spoke. I had to break through the barriers created by Jiraiya-san. He made a deal with Uchiha Itachi over a year ago. He created a seal that transferred the Sharingan, and Itachi agreed to use it in exchange for information Jiraiya-san gathered on the 4 nations, excluding the Fire Country from the 5. The seal was activating after Itachi's death, so he wasn't losing anything from the deal, and Naruto didn't know about it till he got back to Konoha. Explained the blonde jounin, and everyone looked at him wide-eyed. What kind of seal was it? Inquired the aged man, narrowing his eye in suspicion. I am not sure. Jiraiya-san was a seal specialist and he created it himself, but I didn't see the details of it in Naruto's memories. Then what is it called? Asked Tsunade, hoping that she would get a hint from the name of it. It's called the Touch of Sharingan. Tenzu hummed and looked on the floor, seemingly lost in thought. The pink-haired teammate of the boy sighed with relief and relaxed in her chair. After a minute of silence, the 6th Hokage pierced Inoichi with his gaze again. So Uzumaki has no other abilities of Uchiha Itachi aside from the bloodline itself? No techniques, no memories. The jounin sported a confident look and nodded. Only Sharingan, Hokage-sama. The old man hummed, satisfied, and turned to leave. Notify me when he awakens, Tsunade. he ordered and left the room. When he did, Inoichi let out the breath he was holding and leaned with his hands on the bed of the patient. He closed his eyes, tired, and tried to gather the thoughts in his mind. Tenzu noticed the change in his behavior and looked at him quizzically. "Something's wrong, Inoichi-san?" The man absently shook his head and looked grim. He looked down on the face of the blonde and shook his head disbelievingly. Seeing that, Tsunade raised a brow. "What else was there?" she asked, curious. The jounin sighed and, still looking down on the teen, answered. "Nothing that much important, Godame-sama," he said, knowing that even walls had ears, and any word that falls will be delivered to the active leader of the village. "I just start to respect Jiraiya even more. God let his soul rest in peace," he added. At his words, everyone looked down on the floor in the minute of silence, while by the opposite wall in the room, hiding behind a powerful genjutsu, the two red eyes stared at the scene, narrowing, digesting the information. Uchiha Sasuke patiently waited to hear more, but the jounin stayed quiet, and his followers behind him, Karen, Jugo, and Suigetsu, bored, yawned, not understanding what he was waiting for. He looked at the occupied bed and his gaze turned hateful. Chapter 3 Itachi, the name on my lips. It was always Itachi. Itachi this, Itachi that. Itachi's the strongest, Itachi's the best. He wanted to be at least the second best, to at least be looked upon. But no, there was no place for him under that spotlight, because it belonged solely to his brother. He had power, he had fame, he had the respect and love. Everybody gave him this. They knew Sasuke as a younger brother, a little boy, that even having potential would never reach the level of someone as perfect as Itachi. Pained him so much. He wanted to be loved by all these people too. He wanted them to look at him with the same admiration, and if not today, then at least one day. He knew that his brother deserved all that respect, he knew it, and he respected him too. But first and furthermost, he loved him. He loved him as a brother loves his family. He loved him because even if rarely, Itachi gave him attention. He loved him because when his father forgot about his existence, Itachi was still there. But then again, he hated him because Itachi was everything he wanted to be, and he knew and felt he will never accomplish that. He hated him because Itachi had everything this village could give, and still there was nothing he wanted to take. He was so perfect, so kind, and at the same time so heartless that you simply had to love him. You give and he refuses to take. You take and he lets you do so. You hate him for being the way he is, and he lets you do that because he always understands. You ask him to kill and he will do this. You order him do the impossible and he still manages that. With time you forget that he's not godlike, but human. And you hate him for this even more, because you know that still being human he crossed the lines that were before him, and you can't even see them because he's too far and you are left behind. And you curse him because being that far he still comes back, as if to taunt you that he can do this and you can't. He wondered back to times when Itachi smiled, when he was a true brother or pretended to be. It made Sasuke think of the masks his brother wore. Which one was real? What was the mask? And what was his true face? He was such a good actor, pretend to love or pretend to hate. For Itachi, lines and limits did not exist. He could go far for what he needed, get it and not move a muscle on his face. Show no satisfaction, no joy. You could only guess what he felt. He could seem so emotionless, and yet you fear him when he looks at you, and you hate him when he speaks a word. And you love him at the same time. He will drive you till the edge and use you, manipulate you, do anything with you, and he wouldn't even lift a finger. His gaze on you is enough. He will grace you with one look, and then you're done. So cruel. And then he moves, beautifully, deadly, like a weapon. And you can't dodge, nor can you fight. And you expect the worst, the most humiliating death, and then he stops, as if he knows when the strings he pulls are the last. And he gives you promises, and he shows his love. And you hate him, and you love him even more. Sasuke stood on the branch of the tree and gazed at what was left of Konoha after it was destroyed by pain. It was slowly rebuilding itself, but it will never be the same. He was troubled. He was thoughtful. He needed time to gather his emotions, as he was lost in everything around him. His one piercing glare was enough to quiet down his companions, and he let the silence grace him with answers, as his mind put the picture in front of him, piece by piece. It formed before him the man, a person he knew so well, and, truthfully, didn't know at all. Itachi was young when he became a true shinobi. Not the genin, a child that played games with knives, but the warrior that was ruthless, and games he played were on the battlefield. He has unlocked the bloodline of their clan when he was 8, and since then, he was getting better and stronger and faster. He didn't show his love for parents or family as a whole. He only sometimes showed a bit of affection to his younger brother, and still it was rare. He was absent most of the time. He had missions. He was always busy. He didn't have time for the social life. He had no friends, no love for his family, nothing he wanted or had other than his responsibilities. He was turned into inanimate, soulless object that existed on orders, and for orders. Was there ever something Itachi wanted? He didn't speak of it. But did anyone ever ask him? He gave everything for Konoha, this ungrateful village that didn't give him anything in exchange. Other than what? If the true Itachi is the one who was a loving brother, then all this village ever gave him was pain and suffering. And if the true Itachi was a heartless murderer, then this village gave him freedom. And the true Itachi, sorry Sasuke, there won't be next time, was his loving brother. And knowing his brother, Itachi would never exchange his Sharingan with anyone or anything. He wouldn't trade it. He was Uchiha, and Uchiha doesn't give what belongs to him. And as different from Uchiha his brother was, there were traits that not even he could get rid of. Another question was, how did this really happen? Jiraiya could create a seal that powerful. After all, if the seal could house the demon fox, who said it couldn't contain the bloodline? Seals possessed power, and it looks like that old man knew it well. He still couldn't believe that his former teammate gained it. And he didn't do anything to have it. Or did he? Him having that bloodline must mean that Itachi gave it willingly. But he wouldn't ever give it to anyone, and even then, in exchange for what? What could be that much important? Something that Itachi truthfully wanted? Did Jiraiya give him something he was craving, longing for? If he did, then what was it? There were only two people knowing that. Naruto and Inoichi. He will deal with his former teammate that had something that didn't belong to him later. First, Inoichi going home. He could expect anything. He could think of every possible scenario, prepare himself for things that could surprise him, shock him, scare him and disgust him, but whatever he expected was not this. Maybe he thought that he may find out that Jiraiya and Tsunade were lovers. Maybe he could find out that Kyuubi is a female and has a heart. Or that Uzumaki Naruto hated orange color. Anyway, finding out that Uchiha Itachi was nothing like the description of him said, wasn't a shock. It was rather inevitable. After all, he knew the boy from the times he was still the shinobi of Konoha, and never believed in him being insane. What was the shock was the scheme behind the Uchiha massacre, and the role Danzu, the current Hokage, played in it. He works for that man. He bows to him, while in reality this man has very dark secrets concerning the past, the present, and the future. And the role that Itachi played in it, though was the main, was unsettling. Danzu and advisors ordered the 13-year-old boy kill his own family, the guilty and innocent people, deciding the fate of the clan without discussing the matter with the council. What a mindless, thoughtless, cruel and immoral act. And to think that they kept it a secret for years. And then, Itachi's wish to keep his brother alive while making the mention believe that he was a murderer. Probably, Itachi knew that if he refused to kill his clan himself, then it would be done by shinobi trained under Danzu's command. And he probably believed that doing everything himself he would still have some control over the situation. Then again, his decision to join Uchiha Madara and Akatsuki was a planned, but difficult move. Madara has not only controlled the fox when he fought Senju, but also when it attacked Konoha 16 years ago, and now he gained control over other Bijuu, thanks to the power of the Rinnegan wielder, Nagato. What a powerful, disgusting and tenacious of life enemy that Madara bastard appears to be. He should be long dead by now. Has that eternal Sharingan given him that much power? What should he do with all this knowledge? Who should he trust with it? Naruto asked himself that question earlier, but the only answer he found was he himself. He gathered his thoughts when he was in Myobokuzen and decided to wait. He wanted to know who would stand on his side once the matter was up for discussion. But the few people he trusted were not enough. And who would believe him anyway? Itachi's a good guy, Madara's alive. Danzu's bad and advisors are senile and cranky. Believe it. Thinking of that and imagining Naruto shout it with his fist in the air cheered him up, and he smiled at the simplicity with which Naruto would act. But he was in a different situation. Unlike Naruto, he had people he could trust with more than secrets. Inoichi walked down the street, lost in his thoughts. He walked home, the one he had to rebuild recently. Ino-chan promised to get back earlier and open the flower shop. If she's there, then he can leave for the evening and find Shikaku. He can tell him this and that, and together they could decide what to do with the troubling matters. Of course, he will try to keep Naruto's personal life and secrets to himself, or even forget them, as he does with other all the time, but the boy's behavior and actions amazed him. His big heart, kindness, loyalty, and ability to see and understand things the way no one else can were refreshing, warming. He wasn't as stupid as it seemed. He's just opened, but not as much as you think. His mischievous smile sometimes hides emotions, sometimes thoughts. He always tells you the truth, but that doesn't mean that he tells you everything. He may seem carefree and happy, but there are times when he's sad. You don't see it because he doesn't want you to. That was very unusual behavior, but one Inoichi could understand. And in that, Naruto and Itachi were very much alike. They kept many things to themselves. Inoichi hummed, glancing around. The neighbors almost finished rebuilding their house, as the nearby shop owners, and the market district was slowly turning lively as before. It was afternoon. Shinobi were busy, mostly with protecting the village borders and missions. Other nations learned of the destruction of Konoha, and there was no certainty if other ninja will not try to attack the weakened leaf. And who knows when Madara decides to make a move again. He reached his destination, the two-stored wooden house, with the nice, flower-decorated entrance and windows. He openly smiled, seeing the sign on the door, turned, opened, and walked inside. The instant smell of nature lifted his spirits, and he turned to the counter to greet his beautiful daughter, only to frown at her absence. He pricked his ears to hear her talking or making steps, but he was graced with silence. It immediately worried him, and he reached for kunai, to be ready in case there was the enemy in his house. He narrowed his eyes, understanding that if there was someone, it was a strong ninja, because he couldn't find anyone's presence. But his senses never lied to him, and they said there had to be someone inside. He quietly, stealthily walked to the back of the shop, where was a storage room that led to other rooms and upstairs. He grabbed the handle and turned it, praying that his daughter was inside. He opened the door, and the first thing he saw was Shikamaru, and it was only because he was on the floor, and he was pinned there by someone he never saw before. The man was pale, young, and white-haired, but his teeth, well, they were sharp. He had some pants on, some sleeveless shirt, some sandals, and a wide, long, and impressive zanbato. He sat on the Nara's back, and his feet were pinning the Chunin's hands to the floor, preventing him from using any jutsus. His sword was stuck into the ground, too close to Shikamaru's head. On the other side of the room were other shinobi he did not recognize, the red-haired girl in glasses and high boots, and an orange-haired man that didn't look like shinobi. Both of them sat on the boxes, as well as the boy he recognized within a second. In front of him, in the middle of the room, the black-haired heir to Uchiha clan sat relaxed, with a narrowed gaze that held fire, directed at him. He and his companions were wearing the Akatsuki cloaks, which caused Inoichi to scowl, realizing what that meant. The boy sat behind his daughter, as his sword was too close to her neck, and it was her he held hostage, and Inoichi felt the shiver run down his spine, knowing that he had never had any business with any Uchiha, until today, when he spoke Itachi's name in the hospital room. Tenzu casually opened the window and looked inside. He was outside of the apartment that belonged to Naruto, and seeing as the boy wasn't here for now, the man decided to look around and maybe have some answers. He wasn't ordered to do so. It was rather his worry and wish to know what happened with the blonde and his teacher on that trip. The only order Danzu gave the shinobi that witnessed the defeat of the demons was to keep their mouths shut about the ability and state of Jinchuriki. But he didn't say they couldn't check his apartment. The building was built as one of the first, and the boy must have made himself at home already. He curiously peeked inside the room, leaning through the window, and then his gaze fell on the window itself. He checked if there were any traps for visitors like him, and shrugging, not finding anything, he entered. He closed it after that and pulled the curtains, not wishing to be seen by someone else. It didn't stop the warm rays of afternoon from entering the place, and the man looked around the main room for a second time, feeling that something was out of place. He was frozen a moment later when realization hit him. It didn't look like Naruto's apartment, though he knew it was. It was simply too clean. Instead of the mess he used to identify his new student and team player with, he saw the order. No clothes thrown everywhere around the room and in different strange places, no weapons under his feet that usually were appearing out of nowhere on the bed, on the floor or on the chair. No scrolls that were often gathered in the kitchen or in the bathroom, and no traps that he was warned about by Kakashi-senpai earlier. It was unlike Naruto. Maybe Sakura came by and cleaned it? He couldn't recall that happening before. Simply curious, Tenzu opened the wardrobe and looked inside. Clothes, orange clothes, jacket, shirts, black, white, purple. That's strange. Towels, boxers, nothing out of ordinary. Satisfied with it, the man closed the wardrobe and strode to the drawers. He opened them and checked the contents. Most of the scrolls were named and he paid them no mind, but the ones he wanted to open were having a blood seal, so sighing, Tenzu glanced around the room again, and tilting his head for a moment, shrugged and then crouched to look under the bed. He frowned, not finding anything interesting there. He rose and walked into the bathroom, turning on the light. Clean. Everything was plain. One toothbrush, one paste, one shampoo, berry-flavored washing powder, besom. The man sighed and turned the light off, and with that went to the kitchen. The shelves were somewhat empty, but there was nothing piquing his interest. In one of the shelves below, he found the box with the spare kunai and shuriken, wires and empty scrolls, ink and the new brushes. Nothing was hidden there. In the fridge was the normal food. Tenzu shook his head disbelievingly and was ready to leave, when he took one last chance and opened the shelf with the trash bin under the sink. He rummaged in the bag with a slight grimace and, raising a brow after a minute, took out a small, empty glass bottle that looked like a medicine. It wasn't supposed to be like this. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was going to rest under the sky watching the clouds, not bothering with anything and smoke. What did it start with again? Ino stated that she had to open the shop, and he had to help her carry some boxes from the storage room. She stated that he's supposed to be a man and help the beautiful lady in need. Not that she really needed that anyway. Maybe she was just lazy or bored. No, that was about him. Yeah, that's why he agreed. And even if he said no, she wouldn't let him go either way. So he let her drag him there, and they entered that damn storage room, where not even a second later, they became hostages in hands of their former classmate Uchiha Sasuke and his pawns. His position wasn't comfortable and he wanted to change it, but that would be just so troublesome. Shikamaru frowned when he wondered what Sasuke wanted from them, or, as it seemed to him, from Ino's father. If he wanted something from them, they wouldn't be waiting in that room for anyone. So it had something to do with Inoichi. Did he have some business with Sasuke or Orochimaru? Not that Shikamaru knew or remembered. Ino tried to speak with Uchiha, but he glared at her deadly, effectively shutting her up. What a good tactic. Maybe he should try that later too. He's close and he'll get here in 2 minutes, Sasuke-kun, spoke the red-haired Kunoichi, and Shikamaru wondered if this bunch worked for Orochimaru before, or if some of them were working for Akatsuki. But judging from their age and attitude towards Sasuke, probably for Orochimaru, the black-haired Avenger narrowed his eyes in reply, and his blazing red gaze that was directed at the closed door intensified. Sasuke was a patient person, but he was tired of waiting. He didn't want to fight the man and force him to speak, so the easiest way was to not give the man any choice. Having his daughter as a hostage was the quickest, safest, and a quietest way. He was a bit surprised that Ino wasn't scared, but he was more interested in what her father had to say. The handle turned, and in the doorframe appeared Inoichi. He quickly glanced around the room to prepare for the difficult situation. Uchiha Sasuke, what do you want? He asked, staring back into the red eyes. Firstly, lift your hands and drop the weapon. The teen replied in monotone, and the man did so, glancing at his daughter, who kept her gaze on the blade under her chin. Secondly, I want to hear the truth. The teen continued, and despite the fact that Inoichi already knew what he wanted to hear, he didn't know how much he needed to hear, so his best option was to elaborate. The truth about what? He asked, keeping his hands in the air and frowning. Sasuke scowled and glared at the man. I want to know what Jiraiya gave Itachi in exchange for using the seal. And I don't want to hear any bullshit about trading the information. The boy warned, and inwardly Inoichi started to form the response. He couldn't think up of anything new because he didn't know Itachi as well as Sasuke did. So telling the truth would be safer, or half the truth. Though he didn't know how Sasuke would react to it. Well, the Avenger raised Ino's head, pulling her hairs to show more of her neck as a threat. Inoichi raised his hands a bit higher in a placating manner. It wasn't Jiraiya. Uchiha frowned hearing these words, and the man continued. It was Naruto. He and Itachi were friends. There were few thoughts that ran in Sasuke's mind at this, and the first was about it being impossible. After all, Naruto was with Jiraiya all the time, and Itachi was a part of Akatsuki. He had orders concerning catching the blonde. They couldn't be friends in these conditions. But there was a second thought that troubled him, and it said that Naruto was his only friend who could understand him more than others, and it meant that he could understand Itachi too. And if he became friends with Naruto, Itachi could do that too, though it still didn't explain anything. He graced Inoichi with even more powerful stare, and the man raised his head a little before speaking again. It started a year ago. Naruto saved your brother's life despite his teacher's protest and took care of him. When he was dying from injuries, he got fighting with the Jinchuriki of the four-tailed beast. It was then that they got to know each other. Still sprawled on the floor, Shikamaru was staring at the man in surprise. Was he lying that good? Or was he telling the truth? Everybody knew that saving a criminal was something only Uzumaki would do. But what the talk was about in reality? They talked about a seal, which one? And what Jiraiya and Itachi had to do with it. They made a deal? Naruto never mentioned this. Your brother gave him this ability so that he could protect himself and you one day. There was no ill intention behind it, continued Inoichi, wondering if the teen knew the truth behind the massacre. From what Itachi's memories showed, he didn't. But surprisingly or not, the teen didn't react negatively at the words about Itachi protecting him. That's more believable, but this is still a bullshit, voiced the teen, and Inoichi inwardly cringed at the cold tone. He thought that maybe he should mention some details of the seal, but Sasuke prevented him from speaking. You don't need to tell me more, I'll see for myself. And with that his red eyes changed, revealing black rounded stars. They stared back at Inoichi, and Sasuke entered his mind, looking for what he wanted to know. You should smile more, Itachi. You look nicer like that, shouted the blonde, slightly nudging the man, and laughing at his surprised expression. So what if he's a criminal? He's human too, answered the blonde to Jiraiya, who paced around him angered. Nah, Itachi, what's your favorite color? Asked the blonde, engulfing the bowl of ramen. Black, was a simple response. I don't believe ya. The blonde grinned as if he knew the true answer. Your favorite color must be orange, the man said, uninterested. But the blonde grinned even more, and then he licked the chopsticks. No, orange is my second favorite, he said, and Itachi raised a brow. I'll tell you my favorite if you tell me yours. The man thought for a long moment, and then slightly nodded, saying, white. At that Naruto smirked, as if saying I knew that, and swallowed before replying. Purple. He seals his soul here, do you understand? Was saying Jiraiya. You're just lucky, I swear. If you can turn Itachi into human being, then the fox one day will eat from your hand. I trust you, said Itachi, explaining his choice. Sasuke's always the strongest. I think I will never be able to reach him, you know? Mumbled the blonde, looking out the window while tying the headband over his forehead. Even now, it seems to me that no matter how strong I am, he will always be better. I am really happy that he gets all that power, even though the way he does it is twisted. But I have to get stronger fast and stop him before he hurts himself. Sasuke's always like that, never thinking about himself but running after his dreams. Want to know my opinion? You're a softie too. Under the tree, the blonde pressed their lips together, but Itachi did not respond. The teen pulled back, looked down and reached for the man's left hand that was on his arm. He gently took it, raised, and then he kissed the knuckles, softly and slowly, as if asking from the man something. He kissed the back of the hand and was pressing his lips to fingers. He finally looked up and was surprised to see the tear that slid down the man's face. He didn't say anything, and looking down again, he reached for the man's right hand, and he kissed its fingers too. Shocked, the man pulled his hands away, and the blonde saw him crying as he pressed his forefinger to the teen's forehead, making him instantly fall asleep. Itachi's hand was pressed to Naruto's chest. That seal was placed by me. So Itachi, said Jiraiya, looking at the blonde, who was sitting on his bed. What about him? The blonde asked. You tell me. I just proved that I didn't fuck up the seal, and you admitted to… What? Fall in love with him? The man inquired seriously, not willing to add to this situation any humor. It's not like this, the blonde started and turned away from the man. I like him. He's nice, shy, kind, funny. He has beautiful hands. I wish I could kiss them again. The teen mumbled and heard a giggling. He scowled and turned to face his teacher. Jiraiya was giggling and grinning and writing something in those notes of his. What the fuck are you doing? The blonde asked threateningly and stood up to get those notes and burn them. Seeing him reaching for his precious literature, Jiraiya got scared and grabbing it pulled back. Come on, Naruto. That was genius. He has beautiful hands. I wish I could kiss them again. I swear this line's worth $1 million. The man shouted, protecting his writings. No, damn it. You won't use that in those dirty books of yours. Give it to me. The teen shouted and moved to take the notes out of the man's hands. But Jiraiya jumped and started to run out of the room and down the corridor, and the blonde ran after him. Itachi, 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 Tachi, Tachi. The man's name never left his lips. He moved up and down on Itachi's lap, rhythmically and repeatedly. His right hand was around Itachi's neck, the left on his shoulder, and he panted, whispering the man's name with every breath. He kept throwing his head back, slowly, and it rolled back to the right or the left, as the sweat covered his tanned skin, and he shut his eyes, getting lost in the feeling. The man kept pressing him tighter to his chest and nibbling, kissing and licking the skin between the neck and shoulder, and biting it, knowing it was sensitive, his hands bruising the skin where he grabbed the blonde's waist and back. When he held the boy's thighs, guided his hips. He panted too, and his name was the music in his ears. Naruto arched his back and Itachi leaned to kiss the seal above his heart, trailing from there up to the mouth of the blonde and claiming it with passion. He woke up first and saw Itachi's face. The man was sleeping, and his expression was peaceful. They were partly covered with white sheets, and judging from the amount of light in the room, it was probably the next morning or noon. The blonde watched the man sleep and smiled at the stupid thought of both of them having lines on their faces. Itachi had 2 and he had 6. Itachi's were nicer, in his opinion. He raised his hand carefully and traced one with his thumb. Actually, they were alike. Not in the looks, of course. Rather, Naruto found out that Itachi was wild too. He just hid it well inside. The man slowly opened his eyes and saw the blonde. The teen smiled at him and Itachi stared back. Naruto resumed tracing the line on Itachi's face, and after a long moment of silence, the man put an arm around him. What are you thinking of? Itachi asked, observing the blonde. The teen shook his head slightly and smiled again. Nothing except you, of course. Itachi smiled a bit too and kissed the hand that was by his face. The blonde observed him and made a deep intake of breath, loving the feeling. He swallowed before asking. Nah, Tachi, you didn't tell me how you called that seal thing yet, he quietly inquired, curious. The man kissed the hand of the blonde again and looked up. I called it the kiss of Sharingan, he answered, smiling. Naruto raised a brow at that and frowned. Why didn't you call it something cool like the touch of Sharingan? Why did you have to make the name that romantic? I like the touch, Itachi said and then smirked. But I like kisses more, he added and moved so he was leaning over the blonde. He leaned down and kissed his jawline, at which the blonde smiled and embraced him, letting him place the next kiss on his lips. What am I to you, Tachi? The blonde quietly asked in a whisper. A minute later he heard as quiet whispered response. You're my heaven. Inoichi blinked and stared at Uchiha wide-eyed. He didn't think that he would look into his memories using his bloodline. How much did he see? Probably everything. That was getting more and more complicated and uncomfortable. What would Sasuke do with this knowledge? How would he react to relationship between his best friend and his brother? Ino watched her father intrigued. She knew that something happened when the demons attacked today. There were rumors that Kakashi and Naruto used some amazingly powerful technique and saved Konoha. And now, there's something about Itachi, Sasuke's brother, and something about Naruto and Jiraiya. What her father had to do with this. He and Sasuke stared at each other for quite some time, and she got worried that Sasuke will use some Uchiha technique on him. But then, her father finally blinked, and the blade at her throat slightly trembled. It slowly lowered, disappearing from her line of vision, and then fell down on the floor with a clang. She jumped and joined her father's side, and only then she turned around. Sasuke stared ahead, shocked. He heard a distant clang and noticed the girl jump away. He felt the stares of his followers on him, but all he truly saw was the scene between Itachi and Naruto. How, when, why? Wasn't Itachi alone all this time? Isn't Naruto in love with Sakura? Hey, Sasuke, are you all right? He heard the voice of Suigetsu. He had to turn and state that he was fine, as he always does, but he just couldn't move. His mind was frozen, and he felt a bitter taste in his mouth, as if someone told him a bad, nasty joke. It couldn't be someone's imagination, but he couldn't wrap his mind around the fact that they were Tachi. That's how he dared to call him. And nobody knew? Not even Madara? Jiraiya had to, but he kept quiet without a doubt. And in Konoha only Inoichi, and now he. But it is so unreal. Ino frowned, seeing Sasuke stare into nothing. He was stunned by some revelation. He dropped his sword because his hands got numb, and they fell at his sides. If it was possible, his face got even paler, and all the coldness, danger and hatred he seemed to emanate with earlier disappeared. The water user, Suigetsu, tilted his head, wondering what their leader saw. He hasn't ever seen Sasuke display emotions that visibly, so it had to be something big. He voiced a quiet eh, and Shikamaru under him shared that question. He wanted to know what it was too, and hoped that he'd hear the rest before he got saved by the blondes. Suddenly, they saw Sasuke's hands form into fists, and they trembled, but not in fear, it was rage. He narrowed his eyes and slowly rose to stand on his feet. He lifted the sword and clenched the handle, making a step to the door. Sasuke, started Inoichi, but the teen cut him. Move out of my way, he said angrily, gritting his teeth. The red-haired girl stood up and frowned, asking, What happened, Sasuke-kun? Yeah, and what should we do with him? Asked Suigetsu, pointing at the Chunin that patiently waited to be able to freely move without someone's feet on his wrists. I was betrayed, muttered Sasuke quietly, and his grip on the handle of the sword tightened. Ino looked at Shikamaru worried, and her eyes widened when the wielder of Zanbato stood up. Leave Shikamaru alone, he has nothing to do with this? Asked Inoichi. His arms were at his sides, no longer raised, and he thought if he will be able to stop Uchiha from causing trouble for himself and Naruto. The black-haired teen raised his head somewhat and after a pause, tilted it to speak to his companions. Let's go. They moved behind him, and reluctantly Inoichi stepped away from the door, not willing to start a fight. His eyes dropped to the floor when he realized what was about to happen. Shikamaru rose from the floor and, puzzled, stared at the door where Akatsuki disappeared, and at Inoichi, who, after some hesitation, turned to leave too. At first he blinked. Then he furrowed his brows together. He was on the bed, covered with sheets. It wasn't his, and the walls were different. Then he caught a smell. It was the smell of medicine and the hospitals. He was injured? He used that. He heard then a noise and turned to look around. There was a nurse by some shelf, and she was gathering some papers and tablets. She had a white coat on and pretty yellow sandals. He noticed that she had dark brown, curly hairs, and she hummed some melody a bit, thinking that no one can hear her. He raised his hand to pull the sheets lower, and she turned around surprised, and then seeing him, she slightly screamed, and scared, made a step back. He glanced at her quizzically, and she ran out, calling Tsunade when she reached the end of the corridor. He raised a brow at her behavior and, pulling the sheets completely away, stood up, noticing that he was in the boxers. He lazily walked to the shelves that had the glass doors. He looked there using the glass as the mirror, and wasn't surprised to see the addition of 2 lines under his eyes, and some rare, thin strands of black hairs that appeared on his head. His own hairs, that used to stick out in every direction, were more tamed, and he wondered if these changes were going to last. His expression was sad when he remembered who these traits belonged to. He heard the steps behind the halfway closed door, and from the corner of his eye, noticed Tsunade enter with the worry evident on her face. She looked at him with a frown and closed the door. Then she stepped closer to him and curiously examined his face. He looked at her seriously, waiting for outbursts or questions. But she got angry a minute later and took out of her pocket a small bottle of medicine. It was empty, but it still had the label on it, and she put it on the shelf by him. He glanced at it, understanding where she got it from, but didn't say a word. "The gray soother?" she asked, but her question wasn't about what it was, but about his choice and him using this. She was a medic, and she knew well what it was for. "A motion killer? Are you on drugs? Since when?" She continued, partly mad, partly confused and worried. She didn't understand how she didn't notice it before, but the fact in itself would have never occurred to her. Naruto wasn't a type to use anything. Heck, he disliked medicines and hospitals, and he really never needed it. "I needed it only once. Don't worry. It's nothing that could grow into habit," he answered evenly, and strode to the chair where his clothes were. Speechless, she observed as he put on his orange pants, the black mesh shirt, and tied the sleeves of the jacket around his waist, leaving it there. He turned to face her, and she wanted to cry, because there was something he wasn't telling her, and did not plan to. And truthfully, there was nothing she could do about it. She spoke when he started to put on the sandals. "Danzo wanted to ask you some questions. When you were unconscious, he had Anoichi look through your memories." At this, he froze when he was putting on the second shoe. His eyes looked up, and she turned away, starting the explanation. "He said that Jiraiya and Uchiha Itachi had a deal, in which you gained the Uchiha bloodline, and Itachi the information Jiraiya gathered on the 4 nations. And you didn't know of this until you got back to Konoha?" she quietly said, and turned to him, sadly smiling. "I am telling you this so that you know the version Danzu, Tenzu, Sakura and I were informed of." He nodded after a slight pause, and picked his headband off the shelf. Slowly, she moved closer to him and took it from his hands. Then she gently, but at the same time firmly, tied it on the back of his head, and for a moment, as she stood behind him, placed her hands on his shoulders. Maybe that gesture was a show of trust. Maybe she wanted to remind him that he had her support, or maybe just for a second, she wanted to stop him there and show a bit of care. It lasted for a short moment, and after that, her hands slid down to her sides. He slightly nodded. "I'll talk with him," he whispered, and walked out, leaving her alone in the room. She closed her eyes and nodded to herself, striding to the door. The clearing was perfect. It was wide, even, was placed almost in the center of Konoha, and his imagination let him see the near future, when in this place will stand the high and round-shaped administrative building. That will be the new place for organized meetings of Hokage, the council, and the clan heads. He knew that it will have the white color, and that it will have 7 floors. He knew that on the highest floor will be the balcony, long and wide, from which he will be able to oversee the Leaf Village. He had the image in his head, and he knew that soon it will be reality. It caused a small smile to appear on his old, wrinkled, bandaged face, and it held no malice or slyness, as it usually had. Danzu accomplished many things. He reached his goals, he realized his plans, and he still had dreams he ran after. He wanted Konoha Village to be the strongest ninja village. He wanted the Fire Country to have the largest territory among the elemental nations, and he wanted to change the rules of the Konoha tree. He wanted the Leaf Ninja to remember that every tree needed its roots. He turned behind, feeling the young Jinchuriki approach him, and his mantle billowed in the wind as he faced the teen. He didn't show surprise when he saw the changes in his looks. He knew that it could be connected to him possessing the Uchiha bloodline now, so he ignored it, being interested more in the seal that was supposedly created by the Toad Sannin. "You wish to see me, Hokage-sama?" the boy asked, stopping by him and waiting. His posture was straightened, his hands behind his back, and his face, even though the expression was soft, betrayed nothing, as it was neutral. The older man almost cringed, recognizing the manner in which he behaved. It heavily resembled the shinobi he remembered, used, and feared. "Yes, Naruto, I want you to tell me about this seal." He pointed with his gaze at the teen's chest, where under the mesh were seen the black markings. "How did Jiraiya create it?" He started to question, managing to sound calm, curious, and even friendly. The boy was still for some time, and then he slightly tilted his head, looking at Danzu with undefined emotion. "I believe he was inspired with the Yondame's seal. He worked on this quite long, if I remember correctly, and made the seals so that only physical aspects of the blood transferred to the bearer, resulting in obtaining the bloodline. Though he never explained the details of it and burned all of his notes describing it, not mentioning the fact that he informed me of using it on me just before we made it back to Konoha," the teen replied, keeping his voice low and almost devoid of any emotion. The man narrowed his eyes at that and looked at the seal again. He wasn't sure why, but it seemed to him that he remembered seeing something like this before. Something was nagging him in the back of his mind, but it slipped away every time he tried to grasp it. The blue, surprisingly cold eyes of the blonde shifted to the side, glancing at the few umbu that were hiding around the clearing, and were ready to protect their master, like the well-trained dogs. Then this cold gaze turned back to the man, and Danzu suppressed the shiver that was sure to cover his skin. He casually made a step to the side, starting to slowly walk, as if in thought. "So, did Jiraiya teach you about the seals in general and in details?" he asked, hoping to hear a positive answer and even maybe persuade the teen to recreate the technique. "Of course, I know enough about it to understand the technique and possibly recreate it. Though it would probably take me months or even years," the teen replied in an almost bored manner, as if he thought that the old man should know what he was taught. Still, catching that bit of emotion was hard even for a man as experienced as Danzu. He slowly walked in an opposite direction and wondered why the teen behaved so much alike Itachi, if the only thing transferred to him was the Jujutsu. His curiosity piqued, he tilted his head asking, "You don't have his memories or his techniques, Naruto-kun? It could be of the great usage to Konoha." The blonde shook his head softly, for a moment closing his eyes. "Sorry to disappoint you, Hokage-sama," he replied in an exact tone Itachi would use. It unnerved the man even more, and his grip on the cane unconsciously tightened. The dark eyes of the Nara heir followed the figure of Inoichi, as the man ran after the Akatsuki, planning to stop them before the real trouble began. The Chunin turned to his blonde teammate and spoke. "I'll go with Inoichi-san. You find Tsunade-sama and Danza-sama. Tell them that Sasuke has showed up and Naruto may end up in trouble." With that he ran off, hoping to catch up to the Jounin. They moved to the ruined part of Konoha and he caught up with the man in 2 minutes. "What's the plan?" he asked, turning to the man. The Jounin replied when they jumped up onto trees. "You hold them in shadows, I'll take care of the rest." When he didn't continue, Shikamaru tilted his head. "Well, maybe you'd tell me what happened and who betrayed who?" Shikamaru inquired, frowning. His question followed silence, and he sighed, adding, "How troublesome." They followed the trail of chakra, and the redhead directed them to the clearing, surprised that the source, the blonde they saw on the hospital bed only hours ago, was already on his feet. Sasuke ordered them not to interfere in his fight with his former teammate, and they had no objections, seeing the anger pour out of the raven-haired Uchiha. When they landed, the blonde was in front of them, while the Hokage stood slightly to the side and behind him. The faces of the two did not show surprise, and it even looked like they waited for them. Sasuke reached for his sword and his group took the stances, because before they could move further, the squad of Umbu formed the circle around the two, and after a command from their leader, ordering them to kill the traitor, they attacked. As the cloaked Akatsuki members fought with the black-clad and masked shinobi, Danzu and Naruto continued to stand in place, calmly observing the fight and not getting affected by the death and defeat of their protectors. And when the last fell on the ground, bleeding from the wound caused by the sparkling with lightning blade, their cold eyes landed on the cloaked group. The 3 of them made a step back to give the free space to their leader, while Uchiha glared at the pair with all his might, letting his hateful stare last on the old, and as his mind remembered, guilty man. That man spoke to the blonde shinobi, not at all moved by the scene. "Maybe it is time that you finally beat some sense into your former teammate." In response, a long moment later, the blonde closed his eyes and lowered his head. The wind slightly shifted the strands of hairs on his head, that for a moment covered his peaceful face, and then he stepped away, leaving the old man in the open. With that step he showed that he doesn't care about the man's fate, and will not stop Uchiha from having his revenge. With the shock at his action, Danzu missed the second Sasuke got close to him, and swung his blade in the arc. The blade shone in the light of the last evening rays, as it went through the man, cutting his neck, with which his head, where his face still sported the shocked expression, fell off his shoulders on the ground. The body fell with no grace, partly covered in blood, and joined the fallen Umbu. And Sasuke swung his sword, not stopping again, this time, to cut the blonde shinobi, who stopped it with a quick move of his left hand with kunai. He opened his bored blue eyes, and hating the look in them, Sasuke got angered even more, and he pulled his sword back to swing it again, and in his eyes, the time stopped. The blade made it through the midsection of the blonde's body, and cleaved it in two. Angled, the both parts seemed to freeze in midair, as painfully slowly, they descended to the ground. And the face of the blonde was turned to him, gazing without emotion, which scared him, because on that face he never expected to see that expression. The black lines under his eyes didn't look out of place, and it scared him even more. But the cold blue eyes turned red, and the black dots in them started to spin rapidly, as suddenly, out of nowhere, both parts of the cut body turned into black masses, that turned into countless black ravens, that quickly flew in different directions above the clearing. End of chapter 3.
Ein.
Alright, I know all of it is too damn dramatic, so here is some funny stuff to lift your spirits. Omake. When a fish meets a weasel. Kisame was told that he had a partner now. All Akatsuki members worked in pairs, so he was obliged to agree. He was supposed to meet with him by the entrance to the cave, and so he strode there, wondering how powerful and big that Uchiha kid was. And then he saw the silhouette and the figure in the Akatsuki cloak. He got closer and almost gaped, realizing that the kid was actually small. He stopped by him and looked down. The short brunette brat turned to face him, and Kisame's blue blood stopped. His heart for a moment was completely frozen, and he knew then and there he got to work with a creep. That stare was freaking out, simply. He waited till the brat spoke a word, but he was silent, and Kisame suppressed a shiver, and then opened his mouth to somehow fill the creepy silence. So you're that kid that killed his family?
I
am
Hoshigaki Kisame.
your partner? Shouldn't you, introduce yourself or something? Okay. How should I call you?
Itashi-kun.
Glare. Maybe
Uchiha-kun.
Glare. Damn, maybe Itachi-san?
Ok.
So, we have a mission or what? Chapter 4. You're still here. The ravens filled the air of the clearing and flew in circles, while the few of them flew chaotically. They made the typical sound of the group that gathered, and that noise hurt Sasuke's ears. He gritted his teeth and raged and shouted, "Show yourself!" And he looked around, looking for the blonde, knowing that he was still close. He turned to look behind, narrowing his eyes, and saw his former teammate's face emerge from the air, as it formed from the few ravens that merged with each other. It caused the face to be seen only partly, as here and there were feathers, and the wings and tails of these birds still moved, overall making him cringe at the picture. He wondered how he was caught in this illusion if he was using his own Jujutsu, and noticed that the red eyes of the blonde no longer had black dots in them, but the Mangekyo Sharingan in the shape of shuriken that Itachi used to have. These eyes gazed at him almost sadly, and he wanted to hurt him, to make him feel pain, and to take those eyes away, because they were not his. He activated his Mangekyo too, and attacked with his blade, covering it and himself in lightning, as he rushed to the side and pivoted on his left heel, swinging the sword horizontally. It was stopped with the same kunai, which was now covered in the thin layer of the wind chakra. It didn't budge, as if the sword was a mere stick that had no sharp edges, and the strength behind it was nothing but the push from a child. Sasuke glared at the blonde, who fully emerged from the illusionary ravens and pushed with all his might, trying to prove that he was stronger. The blonde merely observed him as very slowly. His gaze was turning hateful too, and their battle of stares began. "You traitor!" hissed Sasuke, baring his teeth, almost like a snake. that was ready to bite and poison its prey or attacker. His former teammate responded to it with a whisper that had more hatred and pain in it than it ever did. "You murderer!" Simultaneously they pushed and parted their weapons, only to swing with them once more, creating a loud clang. Sasuke pivoted on the left heel again, but this time to hit the blonde's head with his right leg, only for it to be blocked with Naruto's right hand. He scowled at it and, gritting his teeth visibly, bent his right knee and lowered his leg to hit the blonde in the guts with a foot. It was caught and sharply turned, causing the Avenger to fall and roll on the ground. He quickly stood up and started to make hand seals, inhaling deeply before blowing out the wide fireball that covered 1/3 of the clearing easily. In the smoke that it created, he couldn't see if it reached the target, but something just told him that it didn't. Maybe it was the confidence that his former teammate sported or just a feeling, but he knew he didn't even scratch him. He narrowed his eyes, seeing that the few ravens that were still flying above merged together, forming the blonde, who landed on the ground on his feet and faced him. From the inside of the smoke, the blonde he fought walked out, without a hint of being touched, and stopping beside the second Naruto, faced him too. "Clones," realized the black-haired teen and scowled, hating the fact that Naruto preferred to fight him with copies of himself instead of facing him himself. It was insulting because it looked like he didn't think that Sasuke was strong enough to having to be fought by original. He bared his teeth in anger and concentrated on his body, which, after quicker than before, he moved and attacked the clones, curving like a snake and avoiding any hits with fluid moves. In a quick motion, his sword pierced one of the clones through the stomach, as the second was immobilized by the snakes that encircled his ankles from under the ground. But before the second clone was destroyed by Sasuke's sharp blade, he managed to cut Sasuke's shoulder, making it bleed. In the puff of smoke, the Avenger looked left and right, and his bangs shifted, raised by the wind. He put his sword on his back, under the lilac sash that was made of rope, and turned around, looking for the true Naruto. Fisting his hands in anger, he spoke, "I suggest you fight me yourself instead of wasting chakra." A moment later, the blonde started to emerge from under the ground in front of Sasuke, and the black-haired teen glared at him, seeing the body slowly rise above the earth. He focused his chakra on the illusion of the blonde being pierced in lungs, heart, sides, back and hips with sharp, black, tinted red feathers, and almost felt pleasure at the sight he himself created. But the blonde didn't even react to it, continuing to stand and gaze at him with emotion hidden behind the coldness. And then the feathers strangely slid down, turning into dark red snakes that crawled to Sasuke's feet and turned into red, sticky, bloodied ropes that mercilessly encircled his knees and wrists. The ropes pulled him down to the ground, and he pulled them up using all of his strength, not willing to fall. He wanted to gag at the amount of blood and the stains it left on his hands, and pulled himself out of Genjutsu, sweating with the effort. He panted and looked up, only to see his former teammates stand in front of him untouched, unscathed, and what was even more insulting, calm and relaxed. There wasn't even the drop of sweat on him, and it was hurting his pride. He was composed as if this fight didn't mean anything, and Sasuke was just a child that the blonde let get close and play games for his own amusement. They stared at each other, with Naruto keeping all of his feelings inside, while Sasuke's gaze was hateful, and unable to keep his emotions controlled. Sasuke attacked the blonde with his fists. Shikamaru landed with Inoichi in the clearing, and his eyes went wide seeing the corpses, bloody bodies of Umbu, and shockingly, the Hokage. The white mantle of the leader of the village stood out mockingly against the background, dark, dirty, dusty, and red. He looked to the right and saw Sasuke's companions stand at the edge of the scene, not moving. Their gazes met, and he glared at the frowning swordsman, known now to him as Suigetsu. Inoichi observed them too, and they did not move to attack. At their puzzled expressions, Karen spoke, adjusting her glasses. "Sasuke-kun asked us not to interfere in his fight." Shikamaru blinked and turned to look ahead, where in some distance were seen the best friends, and now enemies, fighting each other in a hand-to-hand combat. The day turned evening, and the lack of light didn't let the spectators see the details, but when the opponents were close enough, they could hear them. The raven-haired teen's fist hit the ribs, and his elbow hit the chest of the blonde, pushing him. Naruto stopped the next hit, catching the right fist in his own right, and left in his left, crossing their hands, which after he pulled Sasuke down and his raised foot hit his stomach, and releasing Sasuke's arms, he kicked him in the face, throwing the teen's head back. Sasuke felt the taste of blood in his mouth and knew that now on his jaw formed a large bruise. He turned in his fall to roll on the ground, instead of falling on his back, and quickly stood up, unsealing shuriken from his wrists and throwing them in direction of the blonde. He skillfully dodged, and in the back of his mind Sasuke wondered how strong the blonde was. Was he on par with Itachi? Or Itachi was stronger? The black-haired teen reached for his sword and attacked again. Now faster, with more effort and strength behind each move he made. The blonde blocked his swings with kunai, and seeing the opening, hit him with the elbow. Surprisingly, Sasuke turned into the mud, revealing to have been a clone, and Naruto looked behind from the corner of his left eye, waiting for his opponent to appear. Then, for a moment, his vision was covered in black, and his reflexes forced him to block the punch, aimed at his side, and dodge the swing that could cut off his arm. He released himself from illusion in time to see the sword descending down to cut him in half from above, and acting quickly turned to the side, only to feel that his legs were caught in a wire, and the Avenger put the right foot over his from behind and pressed the sharp edge to his neck ready to cut it. Sasuke's left arm held the blonde in a dead grip, but Naruto still seemed to be coldly calm, as if he expected it. Irked by it greatly, Sasuke narrowed his eyes and hissed. He barely controlled his anger, and knew it would only take an inch, a slight move of his wrist to kill the blonde. How could you? You keep saying that you're my friend, that you want to save me to help me, and yet, right behind my back, you fuck with him. His grip tightened and became painful, and he shook with fury, speaking in a hoarse voice. What have you done to him? You manipulated him. You used him. How smart of you, Naruto. You betrayed me. You lied to me. How could you kiss his hands? The blonde scowled and threw his head back to hit Sasuke's face as his elbow hit him in the ribs, pushing him back. Naruto's red eyes that were spinning wildly became framed with the red eyelids, and he slowly turned around to look at Sasuke, who tightly held his sword at his side and was looking down on the ground, panting in anger. How could you kiss the hands that killed my family, my parents? How could you? He shouted, looking up and trembling with emotion. On Naruto's face was a sad expression, and he bit his lip as the tears threatened to escape his eyes. I loved him, he whispered. He watched his friend grace him with nothing but fury and hatred, as his body was ready to attack and kill, to destroy. And you killed him, Sasuke? He continued, and one salty drop slid down his left cheek, trailing between the lines that decorated his face. A grimace formed on Sasuke's face, and his body started to cover with small shining sparks of his element. Above them in the sky appeared the dark storm clouds and was heard the thundering, indicating the closing in storm. I am glad I did, he answered with venom, and he raised his head, looking down on his former teammate, now burning with disgust at the memory, where he saw them together. So much hatred, whispered the blonde, narrowing his moist eyes. Sasuke called for the lightning and almost roared when he ran to shut this mouth up. He raised his arm to swing the blade and caught the lightning, that suddenly descended from the sky and connected to him through the metal of his weapon, and he prepared for the swing that will kill this traitor once and forever and expected the blonde to evade. But when he got close enough to him, Naruto stood still, and then, his right arm calmly rose and bent when he hit Sasuke on the side of the head with the back of his hand. The move of the arm was simple, fluid, and easy, while the force of the blow was so great that it made Uchiha fly horizontally across the clearing, severing his connection with the storm and making him hit the tree with the grunt. Not even a second later, the blonde was above him and raised him by the neck up, pressing him to the trunk of the tree. The new witnesses of the scene, Tsunade and Ino, who barely was able to keep up with the Godame, stared at it with shock, and the girl wanted to run to stop the blonde, not wishing for any of them to get hurt, when she was stopped by Tsunade's arm on her shoulder. They caught the sight of the bodies on the ground and loudly gasped. The right hand of the blonde squeezed the pale neck tightly, and Sasuke raised his arms to stop it. He gripped the arm but could do nothing. The hold was too strong. Tell me, Sasuke, what is it that you truly hate? Me betraying you with your brother, or me being with your brother? The blonde asked in a soothing whisper, gazing at the struggling Uchiha. You kissed his fucking Hands, Sasuke managed to take out, trying to free himself from the grip. At his speech, the blonde tilted his head slightly and curiously looked into Sasuke's eyes. "Ah, are you jealous, Sasuke?" he inquired softly like Itachi would do. Sasuke widely opened his eyes to stare at him and then glared with passion, recognizing the manner in which the blonde spoke. "Maybe you hate the fact that it was me and not you," the blonde continued, leaning closer to Sasuke's face. "That it was me who forgave him instead of you." The blonde tilted his head to the other side, observing Sasuke. "Or maybe you hate me for being closer to him than you ever could?" Sasuke shut his eyes, not willing to show his emotions, but he wanted to scream, to shout so loud so that someone would finally hear him, hear his pain that he held inside. He just didn't want to admit it to anyone, ever, even himself, that he felt this, that he couldn't understand this. "Tell me, what do you have, Sasuke? His 3 most powerful techniques? How wonderful!" Naruto smiled. "Well, sorry to disappoint you, but I have all the rest. I have everything, so your 3 nice powers aren't impressive much," he said with a slight shrug. And then his left hand rose with a kunai, the same he had from the beginning, and he played with it, before his body tensed, and his cold gaze pierced Uchiha. "I hate you for killing him, Sasuke," the blonde said lowly. "Do you share that hatred with me?" he asked softly, pushing and pulling Sasuke's nerves and strings further, wishing to break him, to hurt him, and remind him of what he did. "I want to hurt you so much. Let me go, you fucking traitor," muttered the Avenger, desperate to be free and tired of being held in the grip. The blonde leaned closer to his face and examined it. "Me, traitor? Look at yourself, Sasuke," he replied sadly. "Look at you," he repeated to himself. "You are so much alike on the surface," he started, sounding almost fascinated, and looked at Sasuke's eyes. "And yet, there's nothing resembling him inside," he continued bitterly, and the eyes he stared in filled with pain and sorrow, and Sasuke didn't want to, but agreed, even though no word left his mouth. "I want to kill you, to have my revenge, and yet I can't," Naruto said, leaning to whisper in Sasuke's ear. "Because I swore to protect you, Otudo, and I will." He almost embraced Sasuke with these words, but then his left hand pierced through Sasuke's skin, plunging the kunai in his stomach, causing the black-haired teen to soundlessly scream and then grunt and hiss with pain. "After I get over my hatred for you, that is," the blonde finished, twisting the knife before pulling it out. He let go of Sasuke's neck, uncaringly grabbing his white shirt and putting, almost throwing him on the ground on his back. "I believe you can take care of the rest, Tsunade-sama," the blonde spoke, turning to the woman. "I don't want to see his face for now," he added, leaving the scene with a cold look. The spectators stared at his back with shock as he left. He knocked on the door slightly, but heard no response. Not bothering to knock one more time, he opened it and walked in. The room was clean, as it's supposed to be in a hospital. There was an occupied bed by the wall, and by it, the chair. The tall, brown-haired, always collected Jounin walked to it and gazed down at the patient. Hatake Kakashi peacefully slept and dreamed of ladies. As in his dreams, the stories of his favorite books were coming true, and he enjoyed the adventures and romances that made his life all the more enjoyable and colorful. In that particular moment, he was saving the young lady that was attacked by bandits when she walked down the street late at night. They easily noticed her because she was blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and her beautiful forms were hard to not notice. She was alone and couldn't protect herself. But then Kakashi, who heard her screaming for help, appeared from behind the corner. And as the man who saves the day, he started to beat the shit out of them, using his most powerful and impressive jutsus. "Nah, Kakashi-senpai, I know you're always late, but that's too much," muttered Tenzu, looking down at the sleeping Jounin, as he stooped over the man and noticed the smile that was slightly seen behind the blue fabric of the mask. Tenzu raised a brow at that and wondered if he should wake the Jounin up from his sweet dreaming, or give him some more time to enjoy. In the end, Tenzu just shrugged and violently shook the man. No, not yet. Sure, darling," mumbled Kakashi in his sleep at that and smiled even wider. Tenzu stared down at the man disbelievingly and then shook him some more. "No, no, 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 no," Kakashi quickly repeated and frowned, turning on his other side. Tenzu tisked and sat on the chair, and then he tilted his head a bit, blinking. Then, thinking that his idea should work, he nodded to himself and placed his palms to his mouth, hoping to sound louder. Konoha's under attack. Konoha's under attack, he shouted uncharacteristically, and very quickly and sharply, Kakashi, frightened, woke up and rose on the bed. He looked to the side and saw his friend, who sat on the chair with one leg over the other, and boringly stared at him, as if he was waiting for Kakashi to wake up for the last 2 hours. "You heard that?" Kakashi asked, and serious as ever Tenzu frowned and asked. "Heard what?" At which Hataki turned away and stared ahead into space, confused. "I swear you'll be late on your own funeral, senpai," started Tenzu, raising his head and looking down at the man. "Why's that? Something happened?" asked the man and looked at his friend, and then his eyes widened and he gasped, "Naruto!" Agreed Tenzu, nodding. "You've missed the whole thing." At this Kakashi frowned and tilted his head. "What thing?" "Well, for starts, it appears that Itachi gave Naruto his Sharingan, making a deal with Jiraiya," Tenzu started, inwardly laughing at the shocked face of Kakashi. Then, Sasuke appeared in Konoha and found out about it. On his way to get revenge or whatever else on Naruto, he killed Danzu. Wait, are you saying that Danzu's dead? You must be kidding me." No, he's really dead." And then Naruto and Sasuke fought. "Huh, and I missed the whole thing," shouted Kakashi, shocked and looked at Tenzu blinking and ready to burst in tears. "Well, are you going to tell me? How was it?" he asked his friend hopefully.
No.
"I wasn't there. But it appears they didn't kill each other," he replied and stared at the Jounin, who sighed and looked down, disappointed. "Actually, I am here to ask you something. It is about Naruto and Itachi. You knew Itachi before, right?" The Jounin was taken aback by the question and looked at his friend puzzled. "Well, I knew him from before, but barely. Why do you ask?" "I'll be straight to the point. Did you know if Naruto was on drugs? Or if Itachi was?" Tenzu asked, genuinely interested. Kakashi's lonely eye impossibly widened and he stared at his guest with more shock present than ever. "If that's a joke, Tenzu, then it's a bad one," he voiced seriously, and in his tone was a note of a threat. At that, the man nodded and stood up from his chair. He smiled warmly and patted Kakashi's shoulder. "Rest well, senpai. I'll come to visit you later," he said, before walking through the door, leaving Kakashi stunned and frozen. When he entered the room, he expected to find it empty, but his once student, surprisingly, was in the bed, covered with sheets, and was staring at the ceiling. His face was expressionless, and his eyes were dim, making him look tired and ill. The room was awfully quiet, and the window was closed, so no sounds of the street were coming through. The curtains lazily hang down to the floor and weren't moving because there was no wind, so the smell of the hospital was evident, and, frankly, unpleasant. "Long time no see, Sasuke," the Jounin said quietly, closing the door behind him. He stood by it for a moment, pausing in his tracks, and then walked to the bed with his hands in pockets. He gazed down with his lonely eye at the teen, and guessed that he won't hear a reply. He stood over him and thought what he should start with, but his thinking process was lazy today, and he tilted his head, humming in his musings. Then, some minutes later, he nodded to himself and started in a bored tone. "I am here because Tsunade-sama wasn't in the mood to see you," he muttered and discreetly observed the face of the teen, waiting for any reaction. There was none. "For killing the Hokage you should be executed." He stopped here and started to wonder if the teen heard him at all. He should have reacted at the word execution, right? But he merely continued to lifelessly stare up at the ceiling, which made him seem absent, unconscious, even. "But as much as someone would wish for your death, we can't do this." He sighed and closed his eye, slightly shaking his head. "Naruto wouldn't let us. You should be thankful, you know? You're still alive thanks to him." He opened his eye and lazily glanced at the teen. "We could kill you while you were still sleeping, but Naruto wouldn't forgive us." He fell silent and looked out the window, not moving from his position. He was still tired and maybe should have still slept on the hospital bed. But something told him that he has to do something or he may. Missed the whole thing again. The rumors were quickly spreading around, starting from Sasuke coming back to the village on his own free will, through Danzu's death being planned by the council, to Uchiha Itachi being alive and around. The piles of bullshit were heard everywhere, and truthfully, there were only few who knew what really has transpired. He himself only knew that Sasuke killed Danzu and then fought Naruto, and was beaten. Then he was also informed of that seal that Jiraiya created. What a powerful thing, and to think that he burned all the notes. Still, Tenzu said that there must have been something else, of which Inoichi didn't wish to speak. Sure, everybody knew that the mind reader knew more secrets than it was allowed, but if he knew about that seal, Itachi, and then Naruto and his secrets and the fox, there could be a lot to dig in. But knowing the man, he will keep quiet till the rest of his days because it was his job. Though, in the council meeting concerning the fate of Uchiha Sasuke, he was on Naruto's and Tsunade's side, stating that the village needed the boy alive, not executed. Kakashi blinked and looked down. The teen was still staring up. The council hasn't decided yet what punishment will be given to you. Well, if you stay in the village. It is no secret that you're strong and smart enough to get away and out of here. But still, you'll be probably forced to stay inside Konoha's walls for at least 2 years, and do a lot of chores. The Jounin continued in his bored tone, not at all affected by the teen's unresponsive behavior. Then, you will probably never have a right to be a clan head, a councilman, a Hokage, or a captain, he added, shrugging. It wasn't his problem, really. Not a lot to lose, honestly. Though, with Naruto protecting your interests, it wouldn't be that bad, probably. He mumbled and looked on the floor thoughtfully. Sasuke never dreamed of those things anyways. But then again, Sasuke had too much pride to let someone be his leader and give him orders. He wouldn't agree to this, ever. Well, unless he really respected that leader. And Kakashi doubted Sasuke would respect the drunkard of a Hokage, or the weakling of a captain, when he himself was stronger and smarter. All in all, there were small chances of Sasuke staying here. And Naruto wouldn't care now after all that happened. He did for Sasuke more than he should have. And it is time Sasuke learns to stay alive himself, without help of others. He sighed before speaking again. Really, you should have listened to me then 3 years ago. With these words, finally, Sasuke moved. He slowly turned his head away from the Jounin, looking at the window now. That could be interpreted in different ways. For starts, it could mean that he didn't agree with the man, and showed that he didn't want to listen. Or he was tired of his speech and it was a sign that he wanted the man to leave. Then, it could also mean that he realized that the man was right, but was ashamed of his actions and turned away to hide his face, afraid that even a bit of emotion could be seen on his features. Kakashi chose the second and the last possibility, and with that, just as lazily as before, strode to the door. He thought if he should walk out without stopping, to show that he didn't care about the teen, that he washed his hands off, but he realized that this would only lead to Sasuke believing that there was really nothing tying and holding him in this village because he was completely alone. So Kakashi, trusting his feelings, stopped. He didn't say anything more, and didn't turn to look at the teen once more. He just stopped, facing the door. It was a sign, a hint, that if one of them wished to, he could stay. He was standing there for only few seconds, but he knew that Sasuke noticed. So with that, he opened the door and left. In the courtyard of the Nara household, Inoichi and Shikaku sat by the small pool, where water lilies were shining in the morning light, only slightly flowing on the water surface, surrounded by the bigger and smaller stones. Sitting cross-legged, the Jounin were in front of each other as between them was the small wooden table, where surprisingly wasn't a board of shogi, but 2 bottles of sake. Shikaku wasn't in his battle gear. He had some black robe on, loose black pants, and fillet that kept his hairs up. It was white in color. The scarred man was deeply frowning, and his bottle was already half empty. That's the basic story of it. And truthfully, I don't know what to do with this. Inoichi finished, thoughtfully gazing at the bottom of his cup. His blonde hairs lazily fell down and he sighed. Tired. What there is to do with it, Inoichi? Itachi's dead, Danzu's dead, Tsunade's the active Hokage again, that Uchiha brat is still here, but God knows for how long Naruto is fine from what I hear around. There's nothing we should do about it. So what if we know this and that? Nobody needs that. Shikaku gulped the remains of the drink in his cup. You want to dig in the history? That's just troublesome. He added, slowly and lazily pouring Amethyr cup of sake. Well, maybe it is wise to change the history. At least, change people's opinion of Uchiha Itachi. He wasn't a murderer. Heck, he's an angel, compared to traitors of Orochimaru's caliber, or even, compared to Danzu and his machinations. The blonde Jounin spoke and looked up. He saw his friend sigh. Itachi wanted for his clan's name to be clean, from what I gathered. If you want to turn him into the angel, you'll have to turn the rest of the clan into demons. Not really what the kid planned. And then, if you want to reveal these secrets, imagine what other nations will think, knowing who we made the Hokage, who we banished from the village and turned missing Nin, and who we kill inside our own walls. The whole image of the leaf would be crushed. Do we really need that? No, the man replied with a shake of his head. Just forget it. We need to take our village out of these ruins, not dig in them. Inoichi closed his eyes in thought, and partly agreed with his friend, and partly did not. The window was widely opened, and the morning light freely entered the room, falling softly on the floor, the bed, and the shelves, as its ends reached the door, where leaning, stood the pink-haired medic, keeping her arms at her sides, and looking at her once love, teammate, and goal. With the sad eyes, she watched his thoughtful expression, as he sat on the bed and looked on the floor. He was clothed, healed, and nothing stopped him from leaving. But he was still here. Sure, he was ordered by Tsunade not to leave the walls of Konoha, and was observed by the squad of Umbu that was hiding outside of this room, but Sakura knew that if Sasuke wanted, he'd be already gone. His face did not betray his emotions, his thoughts, or intentions. Even with all the warm yellow light that surrounded them now, he was extremely pale, and his skin seemed to be cold at touch, even though it was only impression. And unlike the times before, she had no urge to come closer and embrace him, soothe him, or speak kind words. She didn't know what she felt. She didn't even speak a word to him since entering. It was so unlike her. Previously, she would speak first and wait for his response, even knowing that he may not answer. And now she just didn't care. She wondered how much strength Naruto must have to still be sane. Sasuke has killed his friend, came to take his revenge on him, and now he sits here not even making a sound. Did he feel anything? Was he angry? Felt remorse? Has he ever asked himself what he was doing? He killed his own brother. He became nothing more than a murderer his brother has been. He wanted to be as strong as him, while in the end, he became nothing better. Just another killer. It was disgusting. And he dared to try and kill Naruto, the one person that was always with her, in her hardest times of need, in her times of happiness and suffering. They've been through a lot together without Sasuke, who stayed in their memories as a boy they called a friend, a boy they wanted to help because he was lonely. And now, this person in front of her wasn't the boy she knew. Sasuke, she remembered, would never kill people just because he wanted and needed to. And he didn't just kill some bandits, but the Hokage, the Umbu that protected him, and sadly, his own brother. She didn't know that Naruto became friends with the man, but she knew that Naruto could. And she knew that if Naruto called someone a friend, that someone deserved it. So to her, Uchiha Itachi stopped being a murderer, but became a friend of Naruto, who was killed. He knew who entered the room but didn't look up. He didn't want to see her. Surprisingly, she didn't speak. He was somewhat grateful for this. He needed silence to gather his chaotic thoughts that didn't leave his mind. His best and only friend and his only brother. Two opposites to each other. The killer and the savior. The traitor and the loyal shinobi. The heartless machine and the carefree peace lover. The black raven and the orange toad, or the fox. The pale silver moon and the warm golden sun. What did they see in each other? How has Naruto realized that Itachi was innocent? He couldn't read people that well, and yet he was the only one Itachi couldn't fool. And Itachi fooled everyone. He was such a good actor. He fooled him. And the blonde, who met Itachi only the few times you could count on your hand, saw behind that mask. And he forgave Itachi, and he took care of Itachi, and he embraced him, and he gave him love. He gave Itachi what he really truly wanted. Love. He made Itachi happy. For once in his life, in his bloody existence, he felt happy. And it was Naruto. Sasuke closed his eyes, trying to keep his emotions inside. And I killed him. He took a deep, shuddering breath in and gulped. He looked back on the floor and remembered the things Naruto said to him the day before yesterday. That he wasn't angry at the fact that Naruto loved Itachi, but was angry that he himself didn't love Itachi. That he himself never looked deeper and never embraced him again. And Naruto kept his promise. He never lied. He could kill him easily. He could revel in the pleasure of humiliating, defeating, and killing him, and he didn't. He stopped himself because he made a promise. And that promise hurt him, but he was strong enough to keep it. And even if one day that promise will kill him, he will still keep it, stubbornly, as he always did. Leave it to the blonde to give people the example of foolishness and nobility. Sasuke blinked. He wanted to sigh, but Sakura would hear him. He frowned, wondering why she was still here. "Where's Naruto?" he asked out of nowhere, and the girl tilted her head, puzzled. "Who knows?" she started, and he looked up at her questioningly. "No one saw him since the council meeting after the fight between you two," she answered casually, but there was no warm smile on her face as it used to be. He frowned, wondering where Naruto could go, and asked himself if he should go find him to see him. Maybe he should. He didn't have anything better to do, and his followers could wait some more. That will teach them patience. He stood up and turned to leave through the window. "If you dare to touch him, Sasuke, I swear I will find you and kill you," she said, watching his back, and he stopped, only for a moment, to register her words. It wasn't anything he expected from her. Has the day come when she wanted to protect Naruto? It appears it has. They became so different. She wasn't the girl he remembered, smiling, laughing, and naive. She became a woman, as strong as Tsunade now, and he wasn't a boy of her dreams anymore. And Naruto wasn't an idiot. He has learned a lot, and among the three of them became the strongest. And their roles changed. Now it was Sakura who was loyal to Naruto, and it was he who was defeated. He didn't respond, and jumped out, hoping to find the blonde. What for? He didn't know yet. Through the busy, rebuilding streets of the village, he walked for the full hour, but he hasn't found the ramen stand. He was convinced that would be the place where he could find the blonde. But now, without a doubt, it was destroyed, and they haven't rebuilt it yet. He asked one of the following him where Naruto's apartment was, and after waiting for 5 minutes behind the door and checking the place through the window, he knew that Naruto wasn't there. He checked the Hokage temporary office, the Hokage mountain, and even their old training grounds. And then, simply desperate, he checked the only sweet-selling shop that was now in Konoha, the one he coincidentally walked by. It smelled of sweets. It was half empty, and he didn't see the blonde head inside. But by unknown feeling, he turned to the woman by the counter and asked a simple question. "Excuse me, miss, did you see Uzumaki Naruto here?" A blonde with lines on his face. She raised a brow and then nodded. "He was here yesterday," she stated, and he quickly thanked her, before running out onto the street. He knew where he was. He should have known, after all, it wasn't just Naruto anymore. He liked not only salty stuff now, but sweets too. And there were more places he would go to. The wide territory of the Uchiha district didn't exist anymore. Everything left were ruins. The builders and shinobi didn't get to this place yet, so it was still untouched. He grimaced at the picture and didn't know if he should be mad or grateful. On one side, it was his property and it was utterly destroyed, and on the other side, he didn't like the empty streets anyway, so he was glad somebody finally got rid of it. Walking further through these ruins, he was surprised to find the main house untouched. It was as if the force of what destroyed Konoha didn't reach it, and it stood in place as always. He blinked at that and, looking closely, found his blonde friend on the steps leading to the house. He sat there thoughtfully, with his elbows on his knees and his hands with entwined fingers under his chin. He looked exactly like the day before, and Sasuke thought for a moment that he might spend the nights here. He put his thoughts at the back of his mind and strode to him, frowning at his resemblance to Itachi. And as if not seeing him, Naruto continued to stare ahead and think. Thinking Naruto, he thought that he will never see the day that happens, but again, he was wrong. The blonde was serious, calm and wise at the moment. And Sasuke realized that the blonde he knew didn't exist anymore, and the shinobi before him, one he had small chances to defeat, will forever stay like this, in Naruto's place. He stopped by him and stood, staring down at the blonde and black mop of hairs. The lines on his cheeks that were always there got darker with time. The new ones under his eyes were somewhat lighter than Itachi's, but still they were there and quite visible. He always wondered where they appeared from. He didn't recall anyone else from Uchiha clan having something like this. It was only his brother, and he possessed them on his face like a mark, like a sign of being different. They made him seem older than he was, and even more serious. Now added to the bunch that already was on Naruto's face, it got interesting. The thin strands of black hairs on his head only made him look stranger. He was so much alike Itachi it was sickening. As if someone placed them both in one body, though basically that is how it was. Itachi was still there. His soul, his heart and blood. Even his habits. The way Naruto now moved, talked, sat, and probably the way he ate. Everything was there. Just as Naruto said, "Is Itachi happy now somewhere where he is? He's with Naruto now forever. Is it making him happy? That is what he wanted, right?" The blonde looked up slightly and noticed Sasuke's stare. There was no hatred or malice behind it, so he waited for Sasuke to say something. He could start the talk himself, but it seemed wrong. Sasuke came here himself without being invited or called for, so he wanted something, and if he wanted something, he had to ask for it himself. Not be the coward. The silence was unnerving, and Sasuke couldn't stand the blonde's behavior. It was so unlike him, so surreal. Why was he quiet? "Well, aren't you going to shout and tell me some stupid things to keep me here, in Konoha? Like you always do when we meet?" he asked coldly, almost bored. The blonde stared at him and then spoke. "I thought about it," he started. "And you know what? I think I kept my promise." "What was it?" "I will bring Sasuke back to Konoha." "You're here, Sasuke?" Naruto closed his eyes and raised his arms, stressing the words, directing his hands at the Konoha around. "In your own house. Even from now on, I am not obliged to follow you. Do whatever you want. Want my help with something? Fine. But overall, I wash my hands." He waved his arms a bit, dismissively, and got back to thinking. Shocked, Sasuke was quiet for several minutes, and processing that, realized that Naruto was right. He turned away, and his gaze traveled over the destruction around. Should he stay here? Was it his home, or did he lose it completely? Or found it somewhere else? The silence wasn't comfortable, and he looked around again, keeping his gaze on the ruins. He frowned and decided to find an answer to the question that was bugging him for some time now. How did that happen, exactly? Despite understanding what Sasuke was referring to, the blonde frowned. How it happened? He asked in response and watched as Sasuke had a slight twitch on his temple. Naruto was amused by that, but kept his face completely innocent. The destruction of Konoha. He bit his tongue before adding at the end, "What else?" Not willing to hear the story behind the romance between his friend and his brother. What a nasty thing. "Oh, that," mumbled the blonde and remembered as he asked Konohamaru the same question. And the boy, for a whole hour, was waving with his arms excitedly and animatedly describing the thing that happened. "You want the short version or the long one?" he asked Sasuke, and the teen raised a brow to that. "Why, there is more than one?" he asked, confused somewhat. The blonde nodded and Sasuke blinked, and then he decided that he's smart enough to understand what happened from the short version, so he chose the first. "It was pain pushing the button," explained the blonde, and Sasuke frowned. After a minute of silence, Uchiha Ed and asked, "And the second version?" The blonde smirked knowingly and turned away, to look at the surroundings when he started to describe what happened. "I wasn't there when that happened. When I was back, it was already done." Konohamaru said that pain was in the air, like he was flying so far only Hyuga could see him. And then he performed a single jutsu and, like people say, pushed the damn button. They named it so because it looked like he pressed his palms on something in the air. And a moment later, unimaginable force fell down on the village, as if crushing everything with invisible weight, which after, Konoha was no more. Sasuke blinked at that, blinked twice, and then slightly nodded, somewhat shocked that one shinobi could destroy the village with one technique, and that Naruto actually defeated someone as powerful as that pain. He looked at the blonde, wondering how strong he truly was, and the blonde stared back at him. They watched each other for quite long and strange moment, before Naruto raised his left hand and beckoned him to get closer. Sasuke scowled at that because these motions were done by Itachi only, and Naruto dared to behave like him. He had a twitch of an eye when the blonde raised a brow at his grimaced expression, and not really wanting to offend his friend even more, Sasuke reluctantly stepped closer, and the blonde raised his hand. "Don't you even dare," Sasuke threatened. Realizing that Naruto wanted to do the damn fillip on his forehead, he glared as much as he could, and Naruto slightly pouted, before smirking and grabbing Sasuke's head and making him sit by him while his fist was playfully making a hole in Sasuke's head, effectively ruffling his hairs. "Let me go, you damn bastard!" Sasuke attempted to sound intimidating, but all it did was make Naruto laugh. It made Sasuke even more embarrassed, and when he was free, red as tomato, he humphed, doing his best to fix his head with his hands. Between them formed the new silence, and Naruto got back to thinking, staring into nowhere. It irked Sasuke greatly, and he had a twitch of an eye at that silent behavior. "What are you thinking of?" he asked, tired of waiting for the blonde to speak. "Nothing," the blonde said, and continued to stare ahead. His eyes were narrowed, cold, and almost glaring, and it caused a slight shiver to run up Sasuke's skin. He hoped it wasn't him Naruto was thinking of. If in that blonde head now was forming a plan of torture for anyone, Sasuke hoped he wouldn't have to participate. With Itachi's abilities and Naruto's imagination and creativity, he doubted any result of their techniques would be pretty. He wondered how Naruto felt, being two people in one. Well, he had the fox in him, so he had some experience, but with Itachi it was probably different. Itachi was not a demon, but the man he loved. They've become one, and Sasuke just couldn't comprehend how idea like this got in his brother's head. He must have been influenced by Naruto too much. The blonde was like disease, making everyone he comes in contact with good people. He didn't even have to make jutsu for this. Him talking and sitting by you was enough. Like a damn bloodline. Sasuke scowled at that thought and turned away. Noticing it, Naruto raised a brow and looked at him asking, "What?" Sasuke sighed and kept his head turned away. "You." The blonde looked at him quizzically, and Sasuke glared. "Stop behaving like Itachi." Naruto tilted his head. "I can't." At which Sasuke at first grimaced disdainfully, and then slumped, defeated. He loudly sighed and shook his head, and then stood up. He looked around and then behind at the house. Curious, he slowly walked in and looked around the place. He frowned at the amount of the dirt. Then he entered his room. It was the same as he left, not touched in the slightest. He almost sneezed but put the forefinger over his nose and rubbed it, to prevent that embarrassing thing from happening. He got back to the entrance and stopped by the blonde, directing his gaze at the surroundings too. "My room's all dusted," he mumbled to himself, crossing his arms, and at that Naruto h'ned. Sasuke shut his eyes angered and turned to him sharply. "Stop it!" The blonde turned to him not understanding, and Sasuke raised his right palm and covered his face. "Just stop doing it," he muttered in his hand, and Naruto frowned. "You must realize I can't help it, Sasuke," he stated, and Sasuke was convinced even more that the blonde did all of this on purpose. "By the way, what are we going to do with all of it?" he asked, pointing at the ruins that were a bit farther, and what was left of other houses of Uchiha district. "This is not your business, Uzumaki," Sasuke stressed, trying to remind his friend that he wasn't an Uchiha. The blonde just smirked and his hands were again under his chin. "If I really wanted to, I could have become a head of the Uchiha clan easily. After all, I am Uchiha Itachi, even though I am Uzumaki Naruto," he muttered, and Sasuke widened his eyes as realization hit him. Naruto could do this, and not only he could, but Tsunade would without a doubt help him. "But, as it is, I don't really want to," the blonde added, and Sasuke stared at him, stunned. "Ah, if you don't want to stay in your dusted room, you can stay in my apartment, for now," he finished, and Sasuke, unable to control his collected behavior, raised his arms in the air and stared at the heavens, as if asking what for he was doomed with the blonde. The wind blew softly, picking up the dust off the road slightly, and making it stay in the air for a moment, before it settled. The sound of the opening gates filled the silence, and a person standing by the entrance turned around. Suigetsu grinned, his sharp and pointy teeth shining, and it was his moment to say goodbye. "Don't look so grim, Sasuke. I may visit you later or something," he said, and the mentioned teen looked away. Karen and Jugo waved with their hands, and he turned around, leaving Konoha. Karen and Jugo decided to stay with Sasuke for now, as they didn't have where to go, and Konoha didn't seem like a bad place to stay. Sasuke said that he doesn't plan on staying here for too long, but they knew that he didn't plan to leave soon either. He repeated that he is going to stay here only to wait for Madara, because he knew he will come after the blonde, but it really only looked like he was just looking for a reason to stay. They took off their Akatsuki cloaks and were ready to put on the headbands. Suigetsu left because he still planned to find and fight other swordsmen, but traveling to nowhere was a bad idea, at least for Karen, so she traveled with Sasuke because he was cute. The black-haired teen turned and started to walk back to Hokage office, where he had to meet with his former team and the council. His followers walked by him, and Karen discreetly glanced at Sasuke's face, looking for the boy she saw yesterday, when she observed his interaction with his friend in the ruins of Uchiha District. They may not know she was there, but she was glad she saw the real Sasuke. Also, she was intrigued with his friend. "Let it go, Sasuke. I will let go when you stop behaving like my brother," shouted Sasuke, pacing in front of his sitting friend. "But I am your brother," the blonde replied tiredly. "No, you're not. I am Itachi, even though you killed me. Now shut up and leave that topic. I didn't kill you. I killed Itachi. But I fucking remember it," the blonde said in a hoarse voice. Sasuke stopped in his tracks frozen, and then stared at him surprised and stunned. "What?" "I remember you killing him," Naruto said loudly, and his lips trembled, and he covered his face with his hands, shaking. Sasuke stared down at him, shocked. He looked away and almost fell when for a moment his body got numb. He stilled himself and clenched his hands into fists. He couldn't look at Naruto because he was so much alike Itachi. He knew he killed his brother, he knew he hated himself for it, and he knew it pained Naruto and it also pained him, but Naruto… He gulped and could cry now of suffering. And he could cry of happiness, because while Itachi was dead, he was still here. And maybe finally he could touch him and speak to him, and he could finally embrace him and forgive him, and admit to himself that he loved him and needed him. He hated himself for being blind, when these eyes had to see everything. He could curse himself and his actions, but it wouldn't help. He devoted and wasted half of his life to kill the man who was his closest family, his only brother, the man he loved and looked up to, and when it was finally over, he died with him, only to continue his existence with no true purpose or real reason. And taking that life, he took the reason from someone else who was close to him too, and who knew him probably better than he himself ever did. He was ready to curse the clan for the pride it possessed, because that pride was a reason he and Itachi existed for. Itachi taking the wrongs of the clan on himself, while Sasuke living to kill him and clean the name of that clan with his brother's blood, was all they had. If Itachi just thought of himself then, if he just spat on the name they had and stayed within the village, they would still be together and maybe he and Naruto would still find each other. But all this time, Itachi was selfless and lived to realize his plans. He was selfish only once when he wanted to stay with Naruto, and it was the only thing he did for himself. So what if Uchiha clan was innocent? Uchiha Itachi was a monster and Sasuke is a hero? Who needs that when everything's gone? He closed his eyes and gulped. He had to gather himself. He had to force himself to control his emotions. He heard a muffled sob and opened his eyes to look at his friend, who shook, hiding his face behind his palms. Sasuke's breath hitched, and after a moment of hesitation he made a step forward, groggily. Then he made another step and one more, trembling too. He stopped at Naruto's legs, looking at the mop of blonde and black hairs. He placed his hand on the blonde's shoulder and squeezed it. "I'm sorry," he whispered quietly, stopping a tear from escaping his eye. "I'm sorry," he repeated, closing his eyes again. I hate you. I hate you because you took Itachi from me, and, Sob, I love you, because you're, Sob, my freaking brother, Sasuke. How am I supposed to live with it? Just tell me how." The black-haired teen slumped on his knees and his hands touched the knees of the blonde, squeezing them. He hid his face in them, as he had no strength to stop the tears that began to cover it mercilessly. He didn't know what to do, what to say, just to stop the pain. "I am sorry. I am sorry." he continued to whisper out, because it was all he could do. I know he wanted you to kill him, but I don't care. I just can't forgive you, Sasuke? The blonde said in a high, pained voice, and Sasuke's hands grabbed his mesh shirt, to which Naruto stiffly uncovered his wet face and pulled Sasuke's head to his chest, firmly pressing him closer in a pained embrace, as they cried together, lost in love and hate they shared. Some time later, Tsunade rummaged in the shelf, frowning at its contents. She straightened and the corner of her lower lip deformed, when she blew up at her fringe that was supposed to frame her face, not tickle it. She stood with her hands on her hips, glaring down at her desk, and then she opened another shelf and started to rummage there. Sai, Tenzu and Naruto stood in front of her desk waiting for her to find whatever she was looking for, and they exchanged looks time after time, as it was already half an hour since she summoned them. Sai didn't know which expression was right in this situation, so he tried to merge the smile, the pout, the surprise and the tiredness at the same time, resulting in him sporting a strange grimace, seeing which Tenzu cringed and looked away, heavily sweat dropping at the scene of Hokage embarrassing herself in front of her subordinates with her lack of knowledge and memory about her own documents in her own office. Naruto tried to be stoic for the first 10 minutes, but now the twitch of an eye he had for the last 20 minutes turned into the red pulsing temple, which unnerved Tenzu even more, since he prepared himself to hear shouts and complaints from the blonde that used to be his reaction, while the twitching meant that he held everything in and now was ready to explode. Ah ah! The blonde woman shouted in a victory, grabbing the average in size scroll and raising it in the air. The trio was taken aback with her display of emotions but then, actually happy with her accomplishment, loudly sighed, relaxing. She grinned and gracefully sat in her chair, while Shinobi observed her actions. They stared at the scroll and sweat dropped, wondering why instead of asking them to find it she wasted half an hour for searching it herself. She opened it and started to read, making the summoned shinobi grimace at her for ignoring them completely. She hummed, skipping the large part of the text and running with her eyes along the lines. Then she started to rummage in another shelf at her left and looked up, feeling the temperature rise to uncomfortable level. Her gaze was met with the heated, red and spinning glare from Naruto, which effectively shook her, and she sheepishly smiled, before she coughed in her hand, to gather everyone's attention and soothe the tension that Naruto created. As you already know, under his command, Danzu had a group of ninja called Root. There are about 80 operatives, well-trained and prepared for any missions. They are now under my command, but they need someone who will organize them, and that job is for you, Tenzu, she started, and the Jounin nodded. Then she turned to Sai. You know the system of their training personally, so you'll help Tenzu if he has any questions, and then you'll help Naruto, she said and turned to the blonde who raised a brow. She smirked and leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. I know it may sound stupid, but I want you to prepare a program of rehabilitation for the young Roots that became members of the group not too long ago. There are 34 of them, and I believe that if you helped Sai become human again, you could help them too. That's just your gift, Naruto, she finished, and the blonde rolled his eyes. She put the scroll on her desk for Tenzu to take. Here you have all the details. You may start now, she added. They nodded and turned to leave. Naruto, she called the blonde before he disappeared behind the door. Yes, Tsunade? She scowled at him, responding, Call me Tsunade-chan at least. Tsunade sounds weird on your lips, Naruto. Fine, fine, he mumbled, raising his hands, ready for her to throw something at him. She sighed, closing her eyes, and fell silent, to which he frowned and tilted his head. Looking up, she asked, You want to tell me anything, Naruto? She didn't want him to have secrets from her, and was scared of him distancing himself from her and his friends. Even though it seemed that he was just the same, the fact that there were awfully important things he kept to himself unnerved and unsettled her. She knew it was just another proof that he could become a great Hokage. After all, keeping secrets from people who trust you is no small feat, and Sarutobi and Jiraiya were the only shinobi she knew who could do that. Naruto possessing such a skill did not surprise her, but she didn't want to be one of those many people he fools with that ability. But then again, he already had secrets from her, and nothing stopped him from doing that still. He was becoming an enigma, which you believe to understand, until he surprises you again. What are you talking about, Tsunade-chan? You know more than anyone, he replied, confused. And then he added, "You will always do." Before leaving her office with the smile and the words that were once spoken by her teammate, and she knew, and believed that even if she didn't know everything, she will still know more than anyone else. The blonde walked out of the office and strode down the stairs. He stopped when he saw the pink hair in the corridor and followed his teammate, watching as she carried an enormous pile of papers. She entered some room and he eavesdropped. "Here you go. I'll get more in a minute." And she walked out, probably to collect more documents. He walked to that room, hearing the familiar grunt in response to the girl, and curious, peeked inside. There, by the desk hidden under the weight of piles of papers, sat Sasuke, in simple blue shirt with long sleeves and black pants, that he had to put on to change his image of Orochimaru's student, glaring at his work with so much hatred that the blonde was ready to believe he will use Amaterasu to get rid of it. "Complaining about the job, Sasuke?" he asked with a smirk, and Uchiha turned his glare at him, attacking the blonde with his reaction to boredom, humiliation, and paperwork with his eyes. "And you must be really stupid," continued Naruto, and his friend narrowed his eyes at that insult. "Really? Just make a clone and come with me. We'll go meet with the bunch of brooders like you." To this Sasuke frowned at first, but then had his eyes impossibly widened. He looked down at the desk and rolled his eyes, covering his face with his left hand, which was the motion Naruto interpreted as, "Damn, I really am an idiot." Then Sasuke quickly made a hand seal and 3 more identical Uchiha appeared by him. All 3 of them glared at their maker and then at the documents on the table. The blonde raised a brow at it and muttered, "One clone would be enough to deal with the paperwork and fool the co-workers. Well, you can make the second. Go on the date with Sakura." Here Sasuke had a twitch of an eye at this suggestion and Naruto hid his amusement. "Or something. And make the third go clean up the house." He spoke knowingly and saw the scowl on Sasuke's face. Then he shrugged and added, all right, come on, let's go," and turned to leave. Sasuke followed him, confused about their destination, and didn't see one of the clones scratch his nose in a wonder, and then look out of the room in search of Pinky, mumbling something along the lines of, "Anything's better than paperwork." The second clone wondered out loud, "Damn, I think I'll go clean that house. It's more useful than sitting here like an idiot." And he turned to jump through the window. Both of the clones disappeared, and the third one, the slowest of the 3, looked left. Then he looked right and then down on the pile of unfinished paperwork and grimaced like it was a shit. He almost raised his hands in front of him to protect himself from it, but remembered then that he was a damn shinobi and paperwork wouldn't kill him, though it definitely could. He loudly sighed and muttered under his breath, "Fucking traitors." He woke up to the blinding light and frowned, while carefully opening his eyelids, looking around. He was in the room with an opened window, and the white curtain over it was shifting in the wind, as the sweet and peaceful silence enveloped the room. The white walls were lightened by the blinding light from outside, and he blinked, seeing 2 headbands on the shelf. They were black, and metal plates had the symbol of the leaf, as both of them were entwined, gracefully laying there, and waiting to be picked up and tied. A moment later he widened his eyes and, shocked, slowly turned on his other side, to come face to face with Itachi. He was watching the blonde silently, as his head was resting on the pillow, and his dark, black eyes were showing emotion of happiness, as it was accompanied by the slight smile that graced his features. Slowly, the blonde laid on his side to face him, and pressed his hands to the man's chest. "You're still here," he whispered, and blinked, as he felt that he wouldn't be able to stop the tears from falling. He didn't think that Itachi would still be here, and he knew he will miss him greatly once the man leaves. "Of course I am here. I will always be," the man whispered back, smiling a bit wider. Itachi rose slightly and kissed the blonde's shoulder. "I love you, Naruto," he breathed out, and a moment later heard a quiet sob. Confused, he looked down at Naruto's face and saw the pained expression. He frowned and asked, "What's wrong?" But the teen just shook his head and, sobbing quietly, pressed himself closer to the man. Itachi thought that maybe Naruto did not believe him, or didn't expect to hear these words. Or maybe he always thought that he will never hear them, because there couldn't be anyone who would love him. He embraced the blonde tightly, and made sure his lips were close to Naruto's ear. He smiled a bit, and whispered, "I love you." And then he gently kissed the Naruto's cheek, catching the tears with his lips. The teen slightly trembled in his embrace. I love you, Itachi said and pressed his lips to the eyelids, gently kissing them too, and then he nuzzled the teen's neck, continuing to whisper, I love you, Naruto. End of chapter 4. The end. Oh make. When someone called Itachi a pervert. What, me? No, I am not a pervert. No, it's not my fault. Blame Akatsuki, especially its leader, Pain. Huh? Me a pervert? You're kidding. My bodies? What? It's not me. Sasori started it. He and his damned puppets. My puppets? It does not mean anything. If there is any pervert, that would be Deidara. Look at his hands. He has tongues there. What about my hands, What it has to do with pervertism, Yuen? If you're looking for a perv, then ask Kisame. He's the blue one. Huh? The fuck are you implying? Blonde. The fuck? My freaking color has nothing to do with it. You got that? The only pervert here is Zetsu. He has 2 freaking bodies in one. OMG. You were doing it all the time. Right in front of our eyes. Why me? I am not a pervert. Of course I am. No, I am not. Sure I am. Shut the fuck up. It wasn't me. In that moment, Kakuzu and Haiden walked into the cave, and with confused looks, they stared at the other members, who looked at them somewhat strangely accusingly. Frozen, Kakuzu quietly spoke. I think we came in a wrong time. What the fuck these stares supposed to mean? Haiden shouted, riled up per usual. Shut up, Haiden. Don't provoke them, whispered Kakuzu, frowning. Haiden took a closer look and indeed, the stares were too promising. Holy Esachai, Jashin-sama, give me the fucking patience. Kakuzu looked to the left, then he looked to the right with his green eyes, and then he raised his hands in a placating manner. Calm down, we're not here. What you see is just an illusion which was created by Itachi and his Sharingan. We will make a step back, there will be a puff of smoke and illusion will disappear. We were never here and you didn't see us. He spoke carefully and both he and Haiden made a step back and disappeared in a puff of smoke that was created by their feet when they rushed out of the cave as quickly as humanly, or in their case, inhumanly possible. All stares were directed at Zetsu again. What? Don't look at me. That was Konan. She's the pervert. In stepped a beautiful woman in Akatsuki cloak. She was confused with the looks of men directed at her. Is something wrong? Did I do something nasty? To somehow break the tension in the air, she pulled a blue paper bouquet out of her sleeve. Want a flower? It was her. All the members shouted and directed their forefingers at the woman. She's the perverted one. Nuo. She shouted back. It's not my fault. It was Jiraiya-sensei. She admitted, and Pain, who stood by her, nodded, adding. Actually, it is true. Kisame tilted his head asking Itachi. Who the hell is that? The biggest pervert in the Fire Country. He writes good books, actually, with the nice instructions, though you'd need a lot of agility to manage most of those. Kisame turned his head to look at him and stared stupefied. Itachi, you are a pervert.